Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Got One Punch Man God's Powers and Became Cosmic Horror Villain Part 2. Before we start, please go support Zack-Oblivion for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Naruto is a male in this story. Chapter 5, Beautiful Light. The simple flutter of a butterfly's wings can change the world. Butterfly effect. The ninja world was always very dark. Anyone who wanted to become a ninja had to keep this fact in mind, if they wanted to have even the slightest chance of surviving. Until a discovery marked a before and after in the world. A new continent had been discovered. As soon as it was discovered, all the villages had sent their ninjas to gather information about the place. Only a few managed to return, and they all gave the same report about that place. This continent was inhabited. The people of this place called it Earthland. The fact that this new place was inhabited was already surprising, but what completely shocked all the elemental nations was the fact that these people did not use chakra, but rather used a very different power, which they called magic. Furthermore, there was also the fact that there existed various supernatural races there, such as dragons, which were extremely powerful, being both feared and respected in those lands. Likewise, the inhabitants of Earthland had also realized the existence of the elemental nations, this discovery being a surprise to them. Interactions between the two continents were not long in coming. Leaders of various countries and villages met with leaders of the other continents, seeing if they could reach an agreement that would allow them to take advantage of each other's resources. Konoha was one of these villages. However, its Hokage, Danzo Shimura, attempted to manipulate Earthland's higher-ups with a special genjutsu from the Sharingan he stole from Shursui Uchiha, which ended with him being discovered by the wizards. Because of this, since the spy magicians ended up discovering how corrupt the village was, a war ended up breaking out between Konoha and Earthland. This was just one of many events that ended up unleashing true chaos. The ninja world was corrupt to the core, but so were several high-ranking officials and inhabitants of Earthland, which is why it was the greed of these people that ended up condemning them. The war was inevitable. Wizards and ninjas engaged in a great war, magic versus chakra. All the villages and guilds were involved in the fight to survive, including a guild named Fairy Tail, and this conflict ended up involving and attracting the attention of third parties, such as the Dragon of the Apocalypse, 𝙬𝕒𝕦𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚, the dark and immortal magician, 𝙬𝙖𝙪𝙨𝙚, and the most powerful criminal organization of the elemental nations, Akatsuki, all believing that they could take advantage of this conflict to carry out their respective objectives. In the end, the world turned into chaos. Sasuke Uchiha had a serious expression on his face, his firm steps echoing in the silence of the place. The black-haired man was running at high speeds through numerous warfields, contemplating along the way all the chaos and destruction that the war had produced. He only had one goal in mind, to reach the village of Konoha, that village that had caused him so much pain over the years. The young man, now 18 years old, had been through a lot. He had killed and absorbed Orochimaru, he had killed his older brother, Itachi, taking his eyes and obtaining his eternal Manjikyu. He also managed to kill everyone in Akatsuki, including their leader, Pain, stealing his Rinnegan, obtaining more power. By this point, he was already aware of what happened to Itachi in the village, because Obito had told him about it before he killed him. It was a shame that the latter destroyed his eye before dying. His Kamui would have been very useful to him. As if this wasn't enough, he had gone to the new continent and managed to learn magic. It was an extremely difficult process, especially getting his chakra and that strange energy to work in an orderly manner in his body, but in the end he managed to become the first person to use chakra and magic at the same time, which only made him even more powerful. To test his new abilities, he had faced extremely strong opponents, including the Dark Dragon, 𝙬𝕒𝕣𝕧𝕚𝕚, managing to defeat and kill him, gaining his power by absorbing his magic with one of the Rinnegan paths enhanced by his magic. He also had a confrontation with the immortal mage, 𝙬𝙗. At first his curse was a problem, but he managed to use his Rinnegan to separate his soul from his body, which he set ablaze with Amaterasu. Being immortal, his body did not die as such, but those flames could not be extinguished with anything, so his empty body was rendered useless. However, he sealed it in a scroll, just in case. His mind was in complete chaos, the revelation that all this time, his brother, the person he admired and appreciated the most, the one who had murdered his entire clan, his family, and who had mentally tortured him on 2 occasions, causing him traumas that would never disappear, was actually only seeking to protect him, was too much for him. That revelation was only what caused his descent into madness, which is why Konoha, the village that caused him and his clan so much pain, became the new target of his revenge. He had first killed Danzo, although his Taka team ended up dying, due to the constant fights they had to go through to get to the damned old man. Personally, he cared little or nothing about them, he barely knew their names, he only used them for his convenience, and so he wouldn't feel so alone. For him, being alone was what he hated the most, so he formed that team so, unconsciously, he wouldn't feel alone. After killing Danzo, he met his old Team 7, who were extremely obsessed with taking him back to that pigsty of a village that gave him nothing but pain, especially Naruto was the most obsessed. I'll kill them all. Team 7 was nothing more than a parasite attached to him, the friendship they once had completely broken. In the end, they only wanted to keep him chained to that place that had brought him nothing but pain. And Naruto was the worst, he was extremely toxic, being obsessed with him, he didn't care what he wanted or what he did, as long as he was chained to Konoha, that wasn't a friendship at all, it was just a toxic relationship, and that blonde was an idiot for not realizing that. Currently, he was heading at full speed towards Konoha, having the sole objective of destroying it completely. He could not rest in peace until that filthy place was turned into ashes. 4 hours until the meeting. Meanwhile, far away from Sasuke's location, and a few kilometers from Konoha, there was someone who was walking calmly through a small town. This place was completely in ruins due to the war that was taking place between both continents. The buildings were destroyed, with only a few still standing, the trees were either reduced to ashes or were uprooted. Along the streets of the place could be seen several stains of dried blood, along with the bodies of ninjas, magicians and civilians, which were in a state of advanced putrefaction, due to the time they had been there. Several insects and some animals had already made themselves present, which began to feed on the corpses, devouring them until their hunger was satisfied, while the insects laid their eggs on the bodies, so that their young could have a great feast. The smell of death and putrefaction spread through the air, and this, combined with the appearance of the place, only made this macabre and depressing scene even more desolate. However, there was one person alive in that place, a small boy who was no older than 12. His blonde hair moved thanks to the brief breeze that was in that town, caressing his almost golden locks like a mother delicately caressing her child. His blue eyes, like the sea itself, saw the whole panorama with a disturbing calm. Something that should not be present in an infant like him, even if it were the case of being a genin, since even most of them would be scared by the gloomy and desolate appearance of the place, or by the disgusting smell in the air. The little boy, named Naruto Uzumaki, just stood in the middle of that scene, possessing a tiny and almost imperceptible peaceful smile on his lips. He had not been the cause of that massacre, nor had he anything to do with that village, he was just passing by on his way to his true objective. Naruto would breathe deeply into the air, feeling the cold fill his nose as the air entered his lungs. The smell of corpses did not seem to affect him in the least, closing his eyes for a moment, seeming to be concentrating on something. "It's this way," was the only thing the boy said, before opening his eyes and starting to walk through the destroyed streets of that town. That young blue-eyed boy left the town in a few minutes, dodging the corpses that adorned the city, glancing at the body of an adult woman with black hair, who was next to a small black-haired boy. For a second, a slight glint of sadness appeared in the boy's eyes before said glint was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, continuing on his way to a huge bridge. "I was right," were the words that came out of his lips, while he was in the middle of a huge bridge, seeing how there was a large sign with the name, "The Great Naruto Bridge." This smell. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the horizon, as if he had just found something of utmost importance. Sasuke's footsteps echoed rapidly as they hit the ground beneath him. He was running at an enormous speed, to the point where he seemed to be a blur of speed. He had recently arrived at the elemental nations, so he still had a long way to go to get to Konoha, but with his power, It wouldn't take more than a couple of hours to get there. Even so, he couldn't wait. He was impatient, his heart beating as fast as it was biologically possible, adrenaline flowing through his blood, only making it speed up. The black-haired man had passed through a battlefield, watching as ninjas and wizards fought to the death. Jutsus and spells flew everywhere, causing destruction, chaos and death to increase with each passing second. He didn't pay attention to them. He wasn't going to get involved. He didn't care in the least what they did. He was only focused on getting to Konoha. Everything else was irrelevant. When he was so close to achieving his revenge, the only reason for his living, revenge was everything to him. 3 hours to the meeting. Where are you? Where are you? Naruto's melodious voice echoed like a whisper in the air, his words coming out like a beautiful and at the same time macabre song, which anticipated the moment he had been waiting for. His eyes scanned the entire place, as if he were inspecting it, as if he were an artist judging an extremely complex and fine work of art. Having left the village and the huge bridge behind, the young man now found himself in a large forest, looking around with curiosity. With one leap, he would reach the top of a large tree, managing to see a large part of the forest from that position. As if he was part of the Inuzuka clan, he would begin to sniff the air, closing his eyes to concentrate, all this while that tiny smile still remained impassive on his face. He was excited. He wanted to finally reach his goal. It's close. Desperation and impatience were beginning to alter the mind of the powerful Uchiha, so he decided to make use of the Rinnegan that he had stolen from Pain. Using the power of one of the paths, he summoned a great bird. Without wasting time, he mounted on its back, ordering it with a mere thought to return as quickly as possible to Konoha. The beast did not hesitate for a second to obey his master's order, spreading his enormous wings and rising into the sky, flying at great speed, soaring through the skies as only birds and other winged beings could do. Sasuke could feel the cold air hitting his face hard, his gaze looking down, seeing the great desolate and quite destroyed landscape. From his position and at high speed, he could see how several villages were devastated by the attacks of the magicians, who sought to destroy all traces of the ninjas. For a brief moment, the black-haired man managed to see the village of Sunagakure out of the corner of his eye, noticing how the Kazekage, Gaara, was fighting against a large group of magicians, who were attacking the Jinchuriki with everything they had. A part of him felt sorry for the redhead and his village, but he quickly ignored this feeling. In his life, there was no room for any emotion other than loneliness and hatred. That was the path his older brother had instilled in him. Even though he knew the history with Konoha, at least the part that Obito told him, he couldn't eliminate the immense hatred he had for his brother. That dark feeling that ate away at him inside, keeping in mind the message that Itachi left him, to hate at all costs. The traumas, the hatred, the pain, he couldn't forget it. For everything he had done to him, his heart would simply never be able to forgive Itachi for what he did to him. Even if he only wanted the best for him, he was sure that the way was not by mentally torturing him in horrible ways. Now that I thought about it, I didn't know who was more toxic, Itachi or Naruto. 2 hours until the meeting. Coming out of the forest, Naruto saw several ships lying around destroyed. Something that surprised the inhabitants of the elemental nations was that the inhabitants of Earthland were much more advanced than them, possessing ships which, in addition to sailing, were able to fly thanks to their magic. When war broke out, the wizards took advantage of their aerial advantage in such vehicles, bombing towns, and even entire villages. But the blonde infant just ignored those fallen battleships, continuing on his way with an extremely unusual calm, which did not match at all with the environment that surrounded him. I'm almost there. It should be around here. These were the boy's words, as he looked at the horizon in the distance. Sasuke was feeling more and more nervous as the distance between him and his target was closing in. This wasn't about doubts, but rather about a doubt that had arisen in his mind. That question was, what would I do next? During his journey to obtain power, he never stopped to think about what he would do once he achieved his longed-for goal. When he killed Itachi and believed he had succeeded, he did not feel satisfaction or any kind of sadistic pleasure in seeing the person who caused him the most harm dead. The only thing he felt was a huge emptiness inside him. Although he also wanted to be able to restore his clan, After all the crimes he had committed, that had become simply impossible. He had become a wanted criminal on both continents. There was a price on his head. If they ever caught him, they would send him to execution without hesitation. He could no longer form a family or even make friends. He had practically thrown away any possibility of having a future, all because of his revenge. But the worst thing was that he did not regret it. He was more than willing to continue, no matter what. Everything in order to alleviate even a little of that hellish pain that tore at his heart and soul. It was almost comical that he was thinking about that very subject right now, when his long-awaited revenge was just around the corner. How ironic. 1 hour until the meeting. Ah. Ha. A childish laugh escaped Naruto's lips, that laugh that reflected happiness as well as relief, a laugh that seemed like a rusty and old sound, something he hadn't done genuinely in a long time. The boy found himself in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by the corpses of dozens of shinobi and wizards, along with several of the latter's flying ships, which had crashed into the ground, creating huge craters all over the place, along with several flames, which began to consume everything in their path. From the little grass there was in the place, to the corpses of the fallen. Pillars of black smoke quickly began to form from the flames. That smoke rose towards the sky, beginning to form dark clouds, which covered the sky, preventing the sun's rays from illuminating the macabre scene. Among the many corpses present, one that stood out was that of a female mage with hair as red as blood itself, wearing a semi-destroyed armor, revealing a large number of wounds all over her body. The woman had died, not from her wounds, but from exhaustion. After having fought for so many days without rest, her body could not take it anymore, ending up collapsing on the ground, dying in the mud, completely alone. But this cruel and depressing scenario was not what made the blonde laugh, not at all. What provoked that reaction in the young man was what he had found. There they are, was the only thing Naruto said, looking at the object on the ground. It was a small photo, a photo in which you could see Naruto himself, who was about 12 years old, accompanied by his friends, all smiling with happiness and joy, with the blue-eyed blonde in the middle of them all. Despite being in the middle of a battlefield, that photo did not have a single scratch, dirt stains, burns, or even a small wrinkle. It was in simply perfect condition. With a smile on his face, the infant picked up the small photo, feeling great relief as his fingers felt the texture of the paper, unable to stop a few laughs of pure joy from escaping his lips. "I'm sorry I lost you, I was very careless. But don't worry, it won't happen again," the boy would say, smiling, while hugging that photo against his chest, his smile permanently on his face, his hands caressing that object in an almost sickly way. Haha. "Now we have to go home, someone else is missing." These were the words the blonde said, turning around towards a specific place. Konoha. 1 minute to the meeting. Sasuke's eyes snapped open as he finally saw the village of Konoha in front of him, his long-awaited goal right in front of him. Unable to hold it in any longer, he jumped off the bird he had summoned, which disappeared in a puff of smoke. While in the air, the Uchiha summoned his perfect Susanoo. He knew he had to command respect, to show that his mere presence was a great threat, and there was no better way to do it than with one of his most powerful abilities. The large body of the energy samurai hit the ground of the village with monstrous force, having fallen right in the middle of it. That impact ended up generating a massive shock wave, which ended up destroying at least an eighth of the village, and the reason why it had not been more was because he did not want the entire village to disappear suddenly. He wanted to feel every moment of his revenge. Large and imposing as if it were a horseman of the apocalypse, Sasuke's perfect Susanoo loomed over the village of Konoha, ready to unleash all his vengeance on that filthy village that had brought nothing but pain to his life, clan and family. Without wasting time, he raised one of the Susanoo's arms, launching a blow against one of the buildings, reducing it to nothing more than rubble. Feeling a sick satisfaction run through his entire body, that dark and corrupt part of him, thanks to the hatred he accumulated throughout his life, was enjoying destroying that filthy village. But Sasuke realized something that left him confused. Why? Is there no one here? Indeed, there was absolutely no one. The village of Konoha was completely deserted. But the strangest thing was that there were no corpses or blood anywhere. The Uchiha tried to sense someone's presence, but this was useless, there was no one. This only made the black-haired man's fury appear, causing his Susanoo to take his stand and launch a powerful cut against the village, causing even more destruction, to the point where more than half of it was reduced to rubble. Get out all at once, the black-haired man roared furiously, seeing how his revenge was slipping through his fingers. There was no point in destroying the empty village. He wanted to kill all of its inhabitants, especially the leaders. 3 seconds to go. Hee hee. Suddenly, the sound of a childish laugh reached Sasuke's ears, causing his fury to stop for a second. Since he had recognized that voice instantly, he would recognize it anywhere. 2 seconds. His body instinctively turned towards the direction of that voice, fixing his gaze on the top of Mount Hokage, more specifically, above the head of the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze. Thanks to the power of his eyes, he was able to make out the figure on the monument, recognizing the person and being completely shocked. 1 second. Naruto? Had been the black-haired man's cry of pure shock. Sure enough, as if by some sort of miracle, Sasuke was able to see his former teammate, only at a different age. That didn't make the slightest bit of sense. The memories of when he had killed the blonde were fresh in his mind. He perfectly remembered how he had pierced and destroyed his heart with his Chidori, as well as having reduced his body to ashes with Amaterasu. Completely shocked by what was happening, Chakra's enormous body moved at high speed, ending up in front of the blonde infant, floating in the air just meters away from him. What? What the hell is going on? You can't be Naruto, I killed him, the furious Uchiha had roared, his patience having long since run out. However, he had a very bad feeling. His body was telling him that there was something strange about that blonde boy, something that was not natural or common. His instincts were screaming at him that he should escape as fast as he could, that he should run away and not look back. But he didn't listen. He wanted to know what was happening, and he wasn't going to back down after having come this far, when his revenge was at his fingertips. So, unable to bear it, he screamed at the little blonde boy with all his might. Tell me already, what the hell are you? The Uchiha had screamed at the top of his lungs, to the point where he could feel his throat hurting a little, while his mind thought of the possibilities. Revived by the Edo Tensei? No, he didn't possess the typical arcs of one, a kind of spirit or magical ghost. Also, he wasn't radiating magic like a normal one did. Despite the black-haired man's screams of fury, Naruto only kept that tiny smile on his lips. So, you want to know, hee hee, okay. But don't go regretting it, the infant had spoken, letting out a small, amused, almost mocking laugh, as if what he was about to tell was something beyond the Uchiha's understanding. Well, once upon a time. A long, long time ago. Long, long ago. Long before the universe itself existed, there was another universe. And before that universe, there was another, and another before that. This is repeated hundreds of millions of times, until reaching the beginning of everything, the first universe, the universe that started it all. The original universe. That universe was only inhabited by ninjas. Everything was as normal as it could be, until something happened. A war. But this war was different from the others. It was a war that shook the whole world, that war that even brought the dead back to life, and that forced the 5 great villages to ally, all against a single enemy. The Akatsuki organization. That organization, whose leader turned out to be Obito Uchiha, had managed to summon the most powerful bijou of all, the legendary 10 Tails. Many things happened in that war, among them the resurrection of the legendary Uchiha Madara, who turned out to be the mastermind behind the entire conflict, having manipulated everyone from the shadows. But, in the end, Madara was also a puppet of something higher. Black Zetsu had manipulated all of shinobi history, in order to bring back his mother, the rabbit goddess, the mother of all chakra on earth, Kaguya Otsutsuki. The last 4 ninjas fought her with everything they had, and in the end, they managed to seal her. But at a great price. Kaguya was not willing to lose so easily, so she made one last attack, using some bones that turned everything they touched into dust. That attack had hit all of his enemies. Except one, who managed to protect himself in time. The last warrior watched in horror as his friends fell dead, turning into nothing more than dust. Due to the death of his fellow Uchiha, he was unable to undo the jutsu that Madara had cast upon the earth, the infinite Tsukuyomi. Humanity had been condemned to be trapped in an eternal sleep. And as if that were not enough, little by little their chakra was being drained, to the point where they would be turned into white zetsus. To prevent the world from being invaded by those creatures, the released bijus had no choice but to destroy the cocoons in which the people were trapped, also ending their lives. That completely devastated the last living shinobi, who was left completely alone, in a world incapable of having life again, only having the biju as company. Years passed, and that blonde-haired ninja became an empty shell, a shadow of what he once was. His sea blue eyes, which once shone with life and energy, had now gone out. In his mind, the only thing there was a massive feeling of guilt, feeling like he had failed his friends. All the promises about his ninja path were now worthless. In the end, he couldn't keep any of his promises, he broke them all. His worst nightmare had come true, he was left alone. The only thing that kept his mind from falling into madness was the company of the nine-tailed biju, which resided inside him. In the end, more than 20 years passed, years in which the now adult wandered through the now desolate shinobi world, when something happened that he did not expect at all. It was as if 3 stars had descended from the sky to earth. He felt their presence even as they were entering the planet. He could recognize the type of chakra they emanated. It was impossible not to. They were the same as that of that damned woman who had ruined his life. They were Atsutsukis, a clan of alien beings, who were in charge of invading planets to plant chakra trees, which drained all the energy from the planet and its inhabitants, thus creating the chakra fruits, which served to make the members of this race more powerful. Apparently, upon noticing that Kaguya had failed in her mission to exterminate the beings of that world, they decided to send more of their soldiers. The ninja faced them without hesitation, motivated by defending his planet. He didn't care that it was now uninhabited, since it was the only thing he had left. The fight was tough, but he managed to win. But something happened. The last living Otsutsuki did something. He marked the man with a strange diamond-shaped symbol. This was a karma seal. These seals were what this race used to be reborn. If an Otsutsuki died, and had someone marked with one of these symbols, they would end up being reborn in that person's body. That was that Otsutsuki's plan, but something went wrong. The seal failed. For a reason. Karma seals were designed to mark and overwrite the DNA of any other race, to replace it with Otsutsuki DNA and chakra. However, that blonde was the reincarnation of one of the sons of the Sage of the Six Paths, who was half Otsutsuki. Because of this, a part of the blonde's chakra was Otsutsuki. This ended up causing the seal to fail, becoming what this race called a white karma, which were defective seals, which, when the marked one consumed a new chakra fruit, it would end up becoming a new independent Otsutsuki. The blonde didn't know about this, so he ignored it. Unfortunately for them, the Otsutsuki clan was not happy to see how their attempts were frustrated. They could not understand what was happening, so they decided to send more soldiers. Again, the result was the same. The last shinobi killed them all. But something happened. When his white karma seal came into contact with one of the corpses of those Otsutsukis, it began to absorb them, to the point where it ended up turning them into a chakra fruit. This was one of the techniques used by the one who placed the seal on him. The blonde man knew perfectly well what that fruit was, and he had also realized that that race would not stop until they had destroyed that planet. He did not know what was coming, and that scared him, since nothing confirmed to him that he would be able to win. So, he decided to consume that chakra fruit. As he did so, he felt his power increase greatly, but something strange happened. A sharp pain made him realize that his finger had rotted away. His own flesh and skin were in an advanced state of putrefaction, which left him in shock, since before the battle he did not have that. The blonde didn't know it, but that was because he had consumed the chakra fruit. In doing so, the white karma must have overridden his DNA to make him a new Otsutsuki. However, part of him was already an Otsutsuki. This was one of the reasons why the members of this race did not install karmas between them, since the same DNA and Otsutsuki chakra clashed and repelled each other when they encountered an energy of the same race. The 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚𝕬𝕧 themselves did not know what could happen if one of their own marked another, so they did not take risks and never carried out this process. And that was exactly what was happening to the last ninja. The part of 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚 chakra inside him was clashing and repelling the white karma's attempts to turn him into a new 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚. This reaction caused the man's body to begin to rot and deteriorate, even though his power had increased. The ninja was not aware of this, so he did not pay attention to it, knowing that there were much more serious things to take care of. Over time, more and more 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚s began to arrive on planet Earth, all seeking to finish off the man who had eliminated so many of their own. But the result was always the same. There came a point where all the 𝕬𝕠s entered the blonde's body to help him in the fight, knowing that they too could become targets of those beings. Thanks to the chakra of the tailed beasts, the blonde was able to better resist the effects of putrefaction. One after another, the invaders fell, all being killed by the ninja, who also used the abilities that white karma gave him to absorb them, managing to obtain more power. He needed it, he needed that power, he needed to be stronger, to protect his planet, to protect the only thing he had left. It didn't matter if his body rotted away, if his own organs fell apart from how rotten they were, or if his veins filled with insects and worms, none of that mattered. I couldn't fail, not again. Months passed where the boy did nothing but kill and absorb the new enemies that threatened his planet. With each new enemy that was defeated, the putrefaction only advanced further. It got to the point where, instead of just one finger, the putrefaction had covered almost his entire body, leaving only his head free. That experience was simply the most painful thing the blonde had ever felt in his entire life. He could feel every detail with inhuman precision, how his skin was getting torn by every enemy he defeated, to the point where his own skin and flesh had begun to fall off in some areas, revealing his bones, and some nerves hanging limply in the air. His mind was barely holding on, thanks to the help of the 𝕬𝕠s, but their voices had long since disappeared. He assumed that putrefaction was responsible. At this point, he could barely think, but his determination never wavered. He would not give up on that horrible pain. He would fight to the end to protect his planet, and so it was. Until his luck ran out. One day, they arrived, a new attempt to eliminate him, since he had become a threat by having managed to eliminate so many of their soldiers. Only this time, it was different. It was a large group of at least 50 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚s, led by one, who looked much older and stronger than the others, as if he were some kind of general. The fight broke out, destroying everything in its path, leaving nothing but a great path of destruction wherever they passed. All kinds of techniques were used by both sides, until the result was shown. The entire squad of 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚s had been massacred, being turned into chakra fruits by the blonde, to later be devoured, exponentially increasing their power, but greatly worsening the putrefaction. The only one left alive was the leader of the group. He wasn't going to give up so easily, so he made one last move. That old 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚 drove his fist into the ground, sending a massive energy wave straight into the planet's core, bringing about the ninja's worst nightmare. He could see the ground beneath him cracking as the entire planet shook uncontrollably. Geysers of lava began to erupt all over the world, while multiple natural disasters occurred, from earthquakes to volcanic eruptions. The last thing the blonde man saw before the entire planet exploded into billions of pieces was how that 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚 disappeared into a portal created by himself. That day, planet Earth was destroyed. And with him, the last ninja and human being died. There are acts that should not be carried out. Decisions that should not be taken. And monsters that must not be provoked. The 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚 race felt happy knowing that they had finally gotten rid of that individual who had caused them so many problems. It was a shame that they had not managed to devour their planet, but that was the fault of the idiot Kaguya, due to her great incompetence. They couldn't believe that for a second they had come to care about that little guy. Even in the vast infinite universe, the 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚 race was the most powerful, feared and respected of all. And this was because they were the race closest to the Supreme Being. They were the race that most resembled God. Among all the billions of life forms, only they had been blessed with such a miracle. Legends say that it was one of their own who managed to become the one true God by consuming billions of chakra fruits. That was the goal of every 𝕬𝕦𝕧𝕚, to reach a level of evolution high enough to become gods. In fact, only their leader, nicknamed the Cosmic King, their supreme ruler, and the most powerful of his race, had managed to come even a little close to that level, being considered a demigod among his own. The human race, on the other hand, was nothing. They were not the most powerful race, nor the bravest, nor the most important, nor the one with the greatest potential, nor the most evil, nor even the most neutral. They were just another race adrift in the universe, and with their extinction, nothing changed, because they were not important in the slightest. They were not like the Otsutsukis, who were at the top of the food chain in the cosmos. So, the fact that such an insignificant being was giving problems to beings like them was considered a blasphemy among their people, a sin that simply could not be overlooked, something that hit hard at the pride of the entire Otsutsuki race. Years passed, and the Otsutsuki race pretended to forget the events that occurred on that planet, until it was no longer pretended. Decades passed, and that race continued to absorb the energy of hundreds of planets and stars, increasing their powers more and more. Until one day, something happened. A meteorite had fallen on one of the planets conquered by that race, one of the many planets they had throughout the universe. It didn't take long for the people to go find out what had happened, and when they arrived at the impact zone, they found something they hadn't expected. It was meat, a huge piece of anomalous meat. A huge, amorphous mass of flesh, which was beating like a functioning heart, had multiple eyes all over it, as well as what appeared to be tiny, sharp teeth emerging from its mass. And as if that wasn't enough, the thing was leaking massive amounts of blood, which was boiling at high temperatures, forming a pool beneath it. All the Otsutsukis noticed it. It was alive, and it was suffering. He was too big for his own good. His large size was harming him. He didn't have enough oxygen, which was quite scarce on that planet. He couldn't contain his own heat, having to expel it through all his boiling blood. All of his skin was covered in horrible, huge tumors, which was quite burned by his violent entry into the planet. The inhabitants of that world looked with pure disgust at that abomination, which could only pant heavily, as if it were trying to survive itself. It was as if its very existence was something that life itself rejected, something it was trying to eliminate at all costs, because it knew it was dangerous. Within just a few minutes, they realized the heat, the blisters on their skin, and the nausea. Radiation. That thing was emitting gigantic amounts of space radiation. Using their ocular powers, they saw the creature from further away, noticing how every part of its being was imbued with radiation. Some theorized that the thing must have been wandering through space for a long time, being directly bombarded by radiation from the stars. This would explain the enormous amount of tumors all over its body. The Otsutsuki who was in charge of that planet decided that he wanted to take that thing to study it. He wanted to see if they could get something good out of that little discovery. So he approached less than a meter from the creature. The radiation did not affect it thanks to an energy barrier that covered its body. But that was his worst mistake. The creature seemed to react to the subject's presence, causing hundreds of deformed limbs, similar to tentacles and arms, to emerge from its mass and grab the Otsutsuki. It was just a blink of an eye, where there weren't even screams, just the sound of bones breaking and flesh being torn apart, as that subject was forcibly fused to that being. A great amount of heat came out of his body, generating a cloud of steam. This had caused everyone present to stand on guard, ready for combat, when they heard it. A roar. That horrible, grotesque roar was horrible. It was not from this world. A sound so powerful and imposing, and at the same time so horrible, that it made all the Otsutsukis on the planet shudder. Their own instincts told them that something very bad was near, as if it were the bell of the apocalypse announcing the end. The next thing that happened was that all over the planet, hell broke loose, with only the sounds of flesh being torn apart and devoured. When the entire race learned that one of their planets had been destroyed, they did not know how to react. Millions of their people had been killed and the planet devastated by an endless sea of fire. An entire planet, wiped off the cosmic map in a matter of minutes, reduced to nothing more than a simple smoking rock devoid of any trace of life. They sent several Otsutsukis to investigate. They needed to know what had caused such an act. But none of the soldiers they sent managed to return. That event was inexplicable to them. They could not believe that they had lost one of the planets they had conquered. It made no sense. They were supposed to be at the top of the pyramid. They were the race closest to God. Their narcissism did not allow them to accept that something had killed millions of their people and destroyed one of their worlds. They, who possessed the power and energy of hundreds of worlds, races, and stars that they had absorbed over the ages, were being killed by something they couldn't understand, that they didn't even know what it looked like. It was humiliating. On one of the many planets that this race had recently conquered, 2 Atsutsukis arrived. These were generals of large sectors of the empire that had this race. These Atsutsukis were thousands of years old, in which they had consumed too many worlds, having a power far superior to that of an average Atsutsuki, along with all the experience that came with their respective ages. When the 2 generals landed on the planet, they saw with some satisfaction and pride that the world, which had once been teeming with life, was now nothing more than an empty plain. Its forests had withered, its oceans had been sucked dry, and even its atmosphere had dissolved. Not to mention its inhabitants, who lay enclosed in cocoons, which were connected to the majestic tree in the middle of that depressing landscape, a landscape that both beings had seen in thousands of worlds throughout the ages. The divine tree, responsible for draining all the energy from the planet, its inhabitants, and nearby stars, all with one goal, to create a new chakra fruit. Seeing that tree, they could only see the strength of their race, which had once again risen against other inferior species. At least this way they would give a use to their pathetic, worthless lives. When the gaze of the oldest and most powerful general of the duo fell on that chakra fruit, he advanced towards it with all the calm in the world. After all, it was his turn to devote the result that this tree gave. The Atsutsuki took the fruit and gently plucked it from the branches of the tree. Just by holding it in his hand, he could contemplate its shine, feeling the power that it emanated. It was the forbidden fruit for any other race. Only they had the right to eat these. That fruit was an absolute delight for those of his race, not because they needed to eat to live, no, but because, with each fruit, it meant one more step towards the divinity that this race had been seeking for so long. That guy bites the fruit, chewing and tasting it. But something was wrong, something was not right. When he ate it, he didn't feel like his power was increasing. There wasn't that satisfaction from the new energy running through his being. Something was wrong. For his part, the other General Atsutsuki was astonished when he saw how something had appeared in front of him. Its appearance was disgusting. He was looking at that thing in front of him, while he had a cold face. During his thousands of years of life, he had never encountered such a creature, so the feeling of curiosity had invaded him, in an attempt to understand what that being was. He could not see what expression it had on its face, because it seemed to be disfigured in horrible ways, having eyes of different sizes and sharp teeth all over what should be its face. Both entities saw each other, one did not understand, and the other knew perfectly well its mission. The other Atsutsuki also noticed the presence of that being, looking at it with disgust. In his eyes, this was nothing more than another inferior being, another primitive creature below his race. He was ready to destroy it to leave the planet, but it was too late. That's what I'm talking about. You guys are not God, it is. Shivers ran through every corner of both generals, their eyes widening at the mere words of that creature. The mere fact of hearing his voice was horrible, to the point where it made them break out in a cold sweat. Instantly, they both knew. That thing was the one that had destroyed one of their planets and killed their people. The general in front of him was about to attack him, when he sensed it. An energy similar to that of an Atsutsuki, emanating from that being. But, at the same time, that energy was twisted to unimaginable levels, to the point where he could hardly recognize it. Chills ran through his being and made him tremble, as his own body knew that he was facing a threat, something he simply could not face. The other general was about to act, when he fell inert to the ground, his hands clutching his stomach with great force, doubling over in pain and clenching his teeth with great force. At this, the general realized. They had fallen into the trap. He turned his head, seeing how that divine tree, a pride for his race, began to deform in horrible and grotesque ways, just like the immense roots that covered the entire planet. It was all a trap, they were the prey and the fruit was the bait. It was always this creature and the tree. The being was the tree. It had transformed into it, camouflaging itself in plain sight, and because it emanated the power of an 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬, it was that he had not noticed it. He never imagined that the power of his own race could be used in this way, in such a twisted way. That thing, it was a threat. Error words by cosmic being. For the first time, that race of arrogant beings, proud of their power, had become the same as their victims, as if it were a great cosmic joke. Now they were nothing more than a race facing a threat they could not understand. Where before there was pride, arrogance, and narcissism, this had now been replaced by uncertainty, because for the first time, they were not in control, they did not know what could happen, they had no information about their enemy, and that was worrying them a lot. For the first time in their history, something was using their own powers against them. The chakra energy of the 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 had now also become their enemy, a weapon used by their mysterious and enigmatic enemy. Error words by cosmic being attention. The generals, the oldest, wisest 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬s, bearers of abilities that even managed to affect the very laws of reality. They began to fall at the hands of that monster. Error words by cosmic being. They called it an anomaly, a flaw in the very existence, in the very nature of the universe, something that simply should never have existed. Once all the generals had been killed, only their leader remained, the one who commanded the king's personal guard. He was known as the Great Sage, considered the strongest and wisest 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 of all, only being behind the cosmic king himself. The Great Sage attempted to confront this threat. Accompanied by all the 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬s under his command, they lured him to a desert planet where they ambushed him. The result of that fight was grotesque. Something simply horrible, which would be forever marked in the history of the 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 race. The old man 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 lay on the ground, his limbs savagely torn off, one of his eyes missing, and worst of all, his stomach was ripped open, his insides spilling out and his blood staining the entire floor. Even though he was alive and conscious, the albino could see and feel how that thing was devouring his insides like an animal. It had already eaten his limbs and was not going to stop until it had devoured him completely. Just by looking at it, he knew. That thing. It was like an animal. He couldn't reason, his movements and the way he fought, there was no reasoning behind it, he didn't think or reason, he just acted on pure instinct like any other animal. Whatever had created that anomaly had caused his mind to completely destroy itself, which was also reflected by the nonsensical things he was mumbling during his fight. As life drained from his shattered body, the Great Sage felt the entire planet tremble. This was because his last and strongest soldiers were using all their strength to move the planet and throw it towards its sun. Once this was done, they would explode that star, creating a supernova to put an end once and for all to that abomination that went against the laws of reality. In his last moments of life, the old man could only pray that the plan would work, that they would finally succeed in finishing off that horrible being. Although a part of him knew they were doomed. The Cosmic King. The oldest of his entire race, their supreme ruler and the most powerful of all, a being feared and at the same time respected throughout the universe for his great power, to the point of being considered a demigod. Right now, that king was afraid. Never, not even in his deepest, darkest nightmares, did he imagine that this moment would come. His generals were dead, and the Great Sage lost his life as well. All attempts to eliminate that thing proved to be useless. He didn't understand how he was still alive. They were supposed to be at the top of the food chain in the entire cosmos, and now, his entire empire, the numerous planets his people inhabited, now there were only less than 12 planets left in total. Even their strongest warriors were unable to do anything to them, they were just slaughtered without any difficulty. If they continued like this, the 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 race would end up becoming extinct. King of Cosmic Error words by cosmic being. That horrible, disgusting voice echoed throughout his palace, causing his eyes to widen in horror. He immediately began searching everywhere, trying to sense the presence of the intruder. Error words by cosmic being. The 𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 realized with horror that he could sense no presence on the entire planet, either the guards guarding his palace nor those inhabiting the planet. His fear only increased even more when he finally managed to feel a presence, which was behind him. Without hesitation, he prepared his most powerful attack, no matter what, Even if he had to destroy the entire galaxy and the nearby ones, he was not going to let that monster get away with it. But before he could launch his attack, he realized that his hands had been torn off in less than a blink of an eye. He couldn't even scream in pain when he saw that horrible being in front of him. In the end, the Cosmic King, the strongest Otsutsuki of all, died at the hands of that anomaly that his own race ended up creating. And with the death of the king, the Otsutsuki race became completely extinct. There was no longer a higher level that anomaly could access. Right. Sure, by Otsutsuki. That was the name he had when he was mortal, when he was nothing more than another Otsutsuki of the bunch, seeking to ascend to a higher level thanks to the use of the karma seals to resurrect in another body and the chakra fruits, which managed to make him evolve. After billions of years, he achieved what his entire species dreamed of. He managed to ascend to a level higher than that of a mortal. He abandoned his mere physical form and became an incorporeal and all-powerful being, capable of altering the entire universe at his will and even creating entire worlds. He abandoned his old physical body on some random planet, not caring, for his body possessed none of its power, being nothing more than an empty shell. His own mind had transcended to a level that could only be considered divine. It didn't even bother him when what was once his race destroyed the planet where the remains of his former mortal body remained. But, currently, there was something that caught his attention. The divine being lived outside the universe itself, in a pocket dimension, able to see everything from that place, and had seen how that thing had devoured what was once his race. The god, he looked. Or rather, his behavior was not something that could be understood by mortal beings. In fact, his very being is completely abstract, approaching the concept that mortals might describe as a humanoid figure made of pure energy, and with a third eye on its forehead and horns emerging from its head, but in itself. It is an amorphous form, a form that mortals could not possibly understand. From outside the universe, he was seeing that which had extinguished the Otsutsukis, that disgusting-looking thing. He just stared at it, while that creature did not move in the slightest, after having finished its feast with the king. What is an anomaly for God? What would happen if Christ, Zeus, Shiva, Yahweh, Odin, or any other god that is worshipped in any of the other universes, came across something that should not exist in their worlds? How would they react when seeing one of their creations deformed to the point of becoming an anomaly that they could not even recognize? What would be your reaction? How would your expression be like? You don't belong here. You shouldn't be like this. I don't believe you. You shouldn't be this. How do you exist? God. Can he feel curious? Can he feel disgusted when he sees something? For God. Is it even possible for the concept of unknown to exist? Being that he is the creator of everything. Would you seek to destroy it? Would you seek to understand it? What would God do if something in front of him was not supposed to be as it should be? I had made a decision. He couldn't let that anomaly live here. It had already generated enough chaos in the universe by eliminating the Otsutsuki race. He didn't know what effects it could produce if that thing continued to live. So, the being decided that the best thing to do would be to destroy the entire universe, to make sure that anomaly would not survive. The best thing would be to start from scratch. After all, he was perfectly capable of recreating the infinite universe along with the independent space-times such as heaven and the 9 circles of hell. Suddenly, something happened that shocked Cherbai. That anomaly. It had disappeared. It was as if he had blinked, and when he opened his eyes, this being was no longer there. He tried to search the entire universe, extending his consciousness to every corner of it. He even searched in heaven and hell, but he found nothing. That didn't make sense. For the first time since he became a cosmic being, he was confused. For the first time, he didn't have control over things. What can God believe in when he doesn't even have control over his creations? When, for the first time, he doesn't have control. This only makes him decide. He was about to cause a reset on everything, when suddenly he feels it. A presence behind him. He knows exactly who he is, but he can't understand it. That place was supposed to be a pocket dimension created by him, an independent space-time, separate from the universe, one where only he had access. But had that thing ascended to the same level as him? That thought made a chill run through him. I don't doubt it for a second. He destroys everything instantly. All worlds, the different space-times are altered, distorted and deformed at the same time as matter and antimatter collide with each other, generating an explosion of biblical magnitudes, to the point that no mortal would be able to comprehend or understand. The universe disappears completely, independent space-times such as heaven, hell, and even pocket dimensions are destroyed on a spiritual and conceptual level, leaving nothing but an infinite white void, a place where even the most basic concepts have been erased. Everything ceased to exist. The only thing that exists is nothingness. God. He's alone. Error words by cosmic being. God hears him, and as he feels his whole being shaken, he turns to look at the source. His being shakes as he feels that which he only had when he was mortal, that which he believed he had abandoned when he ascended to a higher form of existence. Fear. In front of you, in front of God. This is it. Just like him, an amorphous and abstract existence, in the middle of infinite nothingness. A deformed mass of what seemed to be rotten flesh, which stared back at him. A fault. An error in one's own existence. What would happen if, despite being the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the very source of creation, God had in front of him something that goes beyond himself? Time, space, matter, antimatter do not exist, there is nothing. And despite that, it moves towards the God understands, even in his terror, he managed to understand it. That. It was a force majeure. What is a character to a writer? What is God when you have control over him in a story? Is God really the summit? And if so, can there be anything superior to God? Is there anything greater than infinity? Something greater than the being that created us? And, while I'm telling you this, Sasuke, I realize something that is very profound. What could be scary about the very concept of God? The answer to this was not to lock him in a time loop and make him have nightmares about his creations blaming him for everything, no. The fact that God was once mortal only revealed to me that he might have hidden vulnerability within. The answer was always simple. What could possibly scare God is having something before him that shows him that he is like all his creations. That he is nothing more than a simple defenseless being before a power that he cannot understand, control, or contain. Maybe. To God, the universe and everyone in it were nothing more than simple stories, which he forgot after they served their purpose of entertaining him. In fact, can you imagine that we are that too? For something above us, that we cannot understand or detect. Have you ever imagined that your entire life is nothing more than a story written by a higher being, and that your free will is nothing more than something that has already been established? How cruel. Don't you think? God is dead. I'll devour that. And as he did, something changed within him. God's power became his own, his souls, along with all the souls of the devoured Otsutsuki's, were erased, serving as nothing more than food for that anomaly. The entire infinite nothingness trembled as its grotesque being changed, opting for a more comprehensible form, less deformed, but equally grotesque and disturbing to anyone who saw it. And with that, his broken mind, the mind of that blonde ninja, was healed by that divine power that ran through his entire being, causing his consciousness that had been lost so long ago to awaken again, taking control of his new body again. At first he was confused, not knowing what was happening or where he was. When suddenly, all the memories of the beings he devoured came flooding back to him, hitting him like a train, and with that, he realized the most absolute horror. Everything had been destroyed, not even his planet, but the entire universe, and his new, grotesque being only made things worse. The new being was lamenting in that void, but since there was no concept of time, he didn't know how long he was there. It could have been billions of years, or it could have been just a few minutes. This only made his already damaged sanity be in an even more deplorable state. Over time, he discovered his new abilities. His own energy went beyond simple chakra, which allowed him to do things he never thought possible. He soon realized that by possessing the powers of God, he could recreate the universe just as God had intended. This brought hope to the new being, hope of having his precious home again, but more importantly, the hope of seeing his loved ones again, who were the most important thing to him. He began to practice, managing to master several of his new powers, and he created a new universe. But this universe was imperfect and unstable, so he had no choice but to destroy it completely and make a new one. His first attempts were lamentable. He was still new to being a creator, so it took him several attempts until he finally achieved what he had dreamed of. The universe was stable and could support life, but most importantly, his beloved planet was back, including his loved ones. Happiness filled him as he descended onto the world he had created to see his loved ones face to face again. But what was found was simply disgusting. Everything was so different. The personalities of his friends were completely different, twisted to the point where they seemed like other people. But not only that, people who were dead had come back to life, new events appeared in history, and some people had never existed at all. Seeing this, he could only feel deep disgust for his own creations, while being disturbed by how his loved ones had been twisted in such a way. No. Those weren't his friends, they weren't. His friends didn't have those personalities. They didn't do those ridiculous acts. All of that was wrong. Having no other choice, he destroyed everything, just like God did with the original universe. He destroyed that horrible world. No problem, after all, it was for a greater good. Once again, he created a new universe, hoping that this time everything would work out, that his real friends would return. But it didn't work. The result was the same. He only got versions that didn't look anything like them. It was like having completely different people with their faces. It was disgusting. And so he kept trying, he never gave up, and he kept trying until today, all to recover those people who were so important to him. Not out of revenge, not out of hate, he didn't care about changing the world or creating a utopia, he just wanted them back. In the end, it was for love. Love for his loved ones. Silence reigned in the half-destroyed Konoha, to the point where you could perfectly hear the wind blowing through the hair of the only two people in that place. Sasuke's eyes were wide open, his entire body sweating profusely from the immense fear that ran through every part of his being, seeing in front of him the monster in human skin. The black-haired man had never felt so terrified in his entire life. But it wasn't just any fear, it was a primordial fear of having in front of him something that went far beyond his understanding, something that exceeded everything he knew about life and the very nature of existence. As that abomination told him its origin, several images appeared in his mind, images of what had happened. It wasn't just that he told it to him, but that he showed it to him. Sasuke couldn't do anything else but tremble at the monster that was in front of him, because it was that, a monster. He couldn't see it as a human. In fact, the word monster fell extremely short of what it was. "Oh, there was also something else I forgot to mention," said that thing, still keeping that small and almost imperceptible smile on his face, managing to get the traumatized Uchiha out of his thoughts. In every universe I have created, something always happens that bothers me quite a bit. The being's smile disappeared, being replaced by an empty expression, which only increased Sasuke's terror. That was the only thing he said, while pointing at him with one of his hands, while his voice was icy, as if a corpse was speaking to him. That almost made the black-haired man faint from everything that was happening, but he still remained conscious for reasons that he himself did not understand. Surely this being in front of him. Even when the previous variant of Sasuke was erased, the new variant he created was able to remember previous events. That bothers me. Someone is not supposed to remember that. It bothers me. It makes me very angry. And the worst thing is, I do not understand why. It must be a fault that I have not been able to fix. I must continue practicing. I still do not have the same control that God had over these powers. I have a lot to practice," were the words of that anomaly, while he continued to stare at the Uchiha, who was unable to move even a millimeter due to the terror that flooded his being. That only made a tiny smile appear on the lips of that one, looking at him with pity and sadness at the same time for the state he was in. "Oh, what's wrong? Don't tell me your mind has already broken. Tell me. Did you think you were unique?" A sinister smile appeared on Naruto's lips, while the shadow produced by his hair covered his eyes. "Did you think you were special?" At that, it was as if the entire universe stopped. Naruto's entire body began to be surrounded by a strong and blinding white light. This did not seem to be just any light. Its white color was not like any other. It looked so pure, as if it were the same brightness of newborn stars. That light seemed to even make plant life grow wherever it shone, as if life itself accompanied it as its faithful servant. It was a light that was both beautiful, imposing, and terrifying at the same time. Quickly, the silhouette of that little 10-year-old boy began to deform in grotesque ways, while his size increased more and more, seeming to have no limits, to the point where Sasuke's Susanoo was forced to step back, watching in horror the figure of that thing that continued to grow, making the size of Mount Hokage look ridiculous. Suddenly, that transformation stopped, letting the black-haired Uchiha see the result. Sasuke Uchiha's scream of pure terror could be heard throughout the elemental nations. What the black-haired man had seen could only be described as follows. So high that it seemed to touch the stars. As scary as a demon. As imposing as a monster. And so powerful. Like a god. Sasuke saw the face of God. And it was horrible. Every time I create a world, it already has its history. That's why you already have memories of having lived with Naruto Uzumaki. When I appear, I receive the memories of what he did. Until that moment, those are false memories that existence itself gives me to catch up on the events that occurred. Even when that happens, I examine the world to see if that actually happened, hoping to see if it is well done, if I manage to fulfill my objective. Or if it turns out to be a disgusting and unpleasant, failed, and worthless attempt. That is why this world still exists. I was simply examining it. Nothing more, nothing less. He had explained the cosmic anomaly, while his face was disfigured in incomprehensible ways and did not reveal a single expression, his voice resonating strongly throughout the half-destroyed village. A voice that emanated power and respect, but at the same time made everyone who heard it tremble with pure terror. Noticing the Uchiha's terrified gaze, the being simply moved one of its fingers, and with that simple action, it launched a massive shockwave against the Susanoo, which was unable to react to that attack, ending up losing half of its body. What's more, Sasuke himself saw in panic how his right arm had disappeared due to that simple action of the creature. It was obvious that he only did this on purpose. The only reason he wasn't dead was because he wouldn't allow it. Without a second's hesitation, Sasuke turned around, using all his power in a desperate attempt to escape from that aberration of reality itself, taking advantage of the rubble of the devastated Konoha to try to lose sight of that thing. That action only caused a slight laugh of amusement from the entity, which saw these actions of the black-haired man as something meaningless. He was perfectly capable of seeing and feeling it, even if he was on the other side of the universe. Well, I think it's time for me to get rid of this little flaw, the being had spoken with an extremely serious and firm tone of voice. He planned to eliminate that flaw once and for all. He would make sure that no other variant of Sasuke could remember anything about the worlds he had created. From the creature's chest, thousands of arms made of rotting flesh emerged, shooting out in the direction of the black-haired man at an impressive speed. Those arms reached out to the Uchiha and caught him between their rotten fingers. His Susanoo was of no use, it fell apart like wet paper in the creature's hands. Sasuke screamed, totally terrified and desperate, to the point where his vocal cords were torn apart. Tears of despair came out of his eyes, while he felt those disgusting limbs lift him into the air and quickly bring him closer to that thing. He desperately cried out for help, for someone, anyone, to save him from that horrible monster. He didn't care who, he just didn't want his life to end like that. In his terror, he even begged for help from his parents, even from his brother. But no one came. In this way, between screams and tears of absolute despair and terror, Sasuke Uchiha's body would touch the putrefied and disgusting flesh that formed the physical body of that aberration, and instantly it would be completely torn to pieces. His skin, flesh, bones, and liquids would separate from each other, joining and fusing with that abomination of existence itself, to the point where the black-haired man's own soul would be erased from the cosmos, having had the same fate as the Otsutsuki's. In the end, they became part of God. When that grotesque and repugnant process ended, the being would only look at the horizon of that world created by him, watching with what seemed calm, as the sun was setting to give way to the night. Without saying a single word, the entity would be surrounded again by that beautiful light, and in less than a blink of an eye, the entire universe, and the space-time along with it would be consumed by it, being erased even at a conceptual level. Life forms, both physical and spiritual, were unable to even realize this, being wiped out in less than a millisecond. In the end, only that entity remained, the creator of everything, floating once again on that white canvas of infinite nothingness, where there were not even concepts. And in the silence of that place, the voice of the being resonated like an imposing echo. Another failed attempt. It's been 500 million times and it's always the same. I hate that this goes so wrong. At least, I hope that with this, the next Sasuke variant won't be able to remember anything. That entity would put himself in a fetal position, hugging his legs, while he seemed to cry and laugh at the same time, in a completely sick way. I'm sorry. I really am. I'm sorry for doing this to you, Sasuke. But you're not Sasuke. You look like him, you have his face, but you're not him. This is for the greater good, it's for them. In the end, it will all be worth it. They will come back and have the happy ending they so deserve. The entity would caress its own deformed face, while its words echoed through the infinite nothingness. He, who had survived the destruction of his world and the entire universe, who had gone through countless situations where everything was over, and still survived, never gave up. If not even God could stop him, nothing would stop him. He had survived everything, because after all, it was in his very nature to never give up, no matter the situation. He was not God. It was the survivor. From the original universe. Chapter 6: The Creator's Lament. In the universe, nothing is static, absolutely everything is in motion, from the tiniest particles to the largest cosmic phenomena. Just as the Earth rotates on its own axis, it is orbiting the Sun, which in turn is orbiting around a massive black hole at the center of the galaxy. However, this is nothing when you take into account that the galaxies themselves are moving through the vast and infinite universe at simply indescribable speeds. But this is not just a coincidence. For many of the intelligent races in that section of the cosmos, it is one of the most terrifying phenomena in all of astronomy. This is because it is not a simple coincidence. Something is dragging the galaxies, something unknown is hiding in the depths of the universe, which is swallowing more than 100,000 galaxies into the purest and coldest void. This is about a specific section of the universe, which has been amazing and worrying civilizations that had the misfortune of discovering its existence for years. A point in space, which possessed a simply indescribable power. This rare phenomenon has been dubbed by several races as the Great Attractor. That strange phenomenon was found in a cosmic megastructure, made up of what were called superclusters, these being the Virgo supercluster, the Hydra supercluster, the 𝕗𝕐 supercluster, and the 𝐸𝑎𝑙 supercluster. All these superclusters of hundreds of thousands of galaxies form the structure that the scientists there call 𝕨𝕨𝕐𝕕𝒂. This is a supercluster, made up of other superclusters of galaxies, being more than 100,000 galaxies and spanning hundreds of millions of light years, a simply impressive cosmic structure. And right at its heart lies that anomaly, the Great Attractor. But what is this? A place? A thing? Nobody knows. None of the races living in that section of the universe have been able to figure out what the Great Attractor is. The closest we have come to defining it is that it is a gravitational anomaly located in the middle of 𝕨𝕨𝕐𝕗, about 250 million light years from the Milky Way. Nobody knows anything else about this thing. All that is known is that it is there, and that it has a gigantic gravitational power, to the point that it is attracting all the galaxies of 𝕨𝕨𝕐𝕗 into its dark jaws. As if it were a giant magnet, it is attracting everything within a radius of 300 million light years. Studies had revealed that this thing must have a mass of approximately 10 quintillion suns, which was simply incredible. Several civilizations had tried to discover what the Great Attractor was, using different methods, from expeditions to the areas closest to it, to high-tech telescopes, but nothing had been successful. The expeditions never returned, and no type of telescope was able to see what was hidden in that corner of the universe. The gravity of the Great Attractor was so great that not even light or any type of radiation or waves could escape. Multiple theories arose about the place, some saying it was a hypermassive black hole, while others said it was an unusually large accumulation of matter. But no matter how many theories were put forward, there was not enough evidence to prove them, which is why, to this day, the Great Attractor remains a complete mystery. The Great Attractor. That gravitational anomaly that had been confusing and intriguing the greatest scientists of the Linear Chaos civilizations for years. Even though no one could see it, it was there, exerting its power over all those hundreds of thousands of galaxies. But this place hid a secret far greater than any thinking being could imagine. Getting closer to that place, we could finally see what that gravitational monster was. Due to the monstrous gravity that it had, which did not let the light out, one could only see an enormous dark void within a radius of several hundred, or even thousands of light years, which simulated the appearance of a black hole. But no, the Great Attractor went far beyond a simple black hole. If a being could penetrate into that immense darkness, he would be able to see what generates that effect. He would see the origin of such a gravitational anomaly in that entire cosmic superstructure. What was in the middle of that immense darkness was beautiful and horrible at the same time. A humanoid figure of simply biblical proportions, its size easily surpassing the size of several galaxies put together. Its appearance was simply horrible and grotesque, seeming as if its entire being was made of rotten flesh. It had no features anywhere on its being. Everything was just a humanoid figure and nothing more. Not even its face had features that would allow someone to see its expression. That massive being was just floating in the immense void, in a fetal position, hugging its legs and hiding its deformed face in its knees. It didn't move, it didn't say anything, it was just there. The mere presence of such a monstrous creature was what caused that powerful gravitational force. Its mere presence and mass were such that it ended up generating that effect in space. It turns out that what the intelligent beings of Laniarchaea knew as the Great Attractor was nothing more than a bed where this being was resting, sleeping so that when he woke up, he could try again to fulfill his greatest dream. The Great Attractor. It was just a bed where God slept. He remembered it. Naruto could remember it all. Every single damn second was burned into his mind. Every single second since planet Earth had been destroyed, since his mind had been completely lost to rot. From the moment he devoured God, his power was what he needed to finally stabilize his entire being and mind, but by then, it was too late. The Creator had destroyed everything in his fear of him. And in the end, only Naruto remained, completely alone in that infinite void. Not even concepts existed, there was no beyond, so even the souls of their loved ones had been erased. He had lost absolutely everything, his friends, his planet, even his own humanity. And once again, he was alone. There was no longer a sensei who believed in him or people who would reach out to him, no. Now, there was only him in that horrible infinite nothingness. He was nothing more than an infinitely small point on a white canvas. He would look around and everything was white, nothing else. There was no place to hold on to, no place to go, no one to turn to for help. There were times when he would raise his hand, his index finger pointing into nothingness while forming an imaginary line. Where does that line go? His biggest and worst nightmare had come true. He was totally and absolutely alone. This was not like swimming to the depths of the ocean, where at least there is a limit. Here he was in nothingness itself, where there was no limit at all. He tried to move many times, he tried to run, but he couldn't. Since there was no concept of space, he didn't move anywhere. He was always in the same spot. Also, since there was no concept of time, he didn't know how long he was there. It could have been a few minutes, or billions of years. He tried to scream with all his might, in an attempt to vent his pain, but he couldn't. The concept of sound didn't exist, so his being didn't produce any of it. He wanted to hit something, destroy something in order to calm a little all that pain and frustration that was in his heart, but he couldn't. He tried to cry with all his might, break down and cry like a baby until he had no more tears left. But he couldn't. His being didn't have the biological need to cry. His entire body had been transformed into something that went beyond human limitations. He did not need to eat, he did not need water, or sleep, or rest. Even the most primitive needs, such as reproductive or sexual needs, had been completely eliminated from his being. In his complete and utter desperation, he attempted to harm himself, so that through self-harm he could release even a little pain, but he could not do so. God was a being who transcended flesh and matter, becoming a spiritual being, an incorporeal being, and having devoured and surpassed him, he too was now an incorporeal being. Completely devastated and without any way to let out his pain, Naruto remained silent, simply hugging himself, while floating in cosmic nothingness, in non-existence itself. He never knew how long he was there, but there came a point when his mind could not take it anymore. He needed to do something so that the little sanity he had would not disappear, and that was when an idea came to his mind. His being was full of power. At the time he had not paid attention to it because of all the events that had occurred, but now he realized, through every part of his being flowed an incredible power, a power that he never believed could even exist. He had nothing to do, so he started experimenting with them. It took him a long time and was extremely difficult. It was all too new for him, and there was no one to teach him how to use them, so he had to discover everything himself. Each thing he discovered was even better than the last, from simple energy manipulation, to the ability to create anything, and when it was whatever, it was absolutely whatever. It was at that moment that a completely crazy idea came to his mind. God was capable of destroying and creating the universe to his complete liking and likeness, and in fact he was going to do so before he devoured him. With that in mind, Naruto came up with the idea that he could recreate the universe, and with it, bring back everyone he lost. He couldn't accept that the people who had supported him so much would disappear into nothingness, as if they were mere trash, as if their lives, their very existences had no value. Besides, he couldn't stand being alone any longer. He didn't want to stay on that horrible white canvas for even a second longer. So, fully determined, he concentrated and began. He gathered an enormous amount of energy at the tip of his finger, forming a particle infinitely smaller than an atom, but with a mass that simply could not be described, his mind already having an idea of what he wanted to happen. Let there be light. With that thought, that tiny particle had exploded. An explosion of proportions never seen before occurred, filling that entire infinite void in a fraction infinitely smaller than a second. Time, space, matter, and an infinite number of concepts had been created by Naruto in that event, which would be called the Big Bang. A simply incredible spectacle, of indescribable beauty, an event that no one else could see. He saw how time, space, reality, and even concepts themselves were born, how colors emerged throughout the cosmos. That was without a doubt the most beautiful spectacle he had ever seen in his entire life, to the point that if he still could, he would have cried non-stop for such a beautiful event. A new universe had been born. Later, Naruto realized that creating a universe from scratch was more difficult than he dreamed, much more difficult. There were concepts that he did not know, universal rules that he did not understand, things that are simply essential for the nature of the cosmos to remain stable. His first attempt, the first universe he created, was extremely unstable, to the point where it was not able to sustain itself. The cosmic balance was lost and the universe collapsed on itself, returning everything to that blank void. This frustrated him greatly, but he was not going to give up. He never gave up. Trial after trial, mistake after mistake, he kept trying, kept practicing. With each universe he created, he learned more about the use of his cosmic powers. To better master them, he had to learn a lot. He was no longer the same idiot boy dumb as a rock. Now he was wiser. His consciousness had evolved to obtain what some would call, like a cosmic consciousness. In one of his many attempts, he wanted to see what would happen if he created a universe, but without the concepts of war and pain. This was because he remembered the cycle of hatred that Pain once told him about, and the constant wars that there were in the shinobi world. So he created that world, but he didn't add those concepts to it, and the result? It was terrible. He had been extremely naive. Since there was no concept of hate, its opposite, the concept of love, did not exist, and so all emotions derived from these two feelings did not exist either, turning all thinking beings into lifeless, emotionless shells. And since there was no concept of war, its opposite, the concept of peace, did not exist either. This led to a massive imbalance in the balance, which ended up causing that world to be destroyed, collapsing on itself like all the other failed attempts. It was then that he realized that there were things, that as horrible as they were necessary. If he wanted to bring his world back, there would have to be wars and hatred, so that in this way, there could also be love and peace. Everything had to be balanced. In addition, he had to give a limit to each of his creations, a barrier that would limit their growth so that they would not end up harming themselves. He ended up calling this the limiter. After hundreds of failed attempts, he finally succeeded, creating a stable universe, with all its laws and concepts in perfect order. He felt proud of his achievement, but he knew that it was only the beginning. After having managed to create the universe, he created the galaxies, an infinite number of these same ones, which covered the entire universe, which had an infinite size. Apart from having created an afterlife, heaven and the different circles of hell, all being independent space-time axes from each other. He had also learned to transform into a being of flesh and blood at will, being able to alter between his avatar and his true form at will, as well as being able to change back to his former human appearance, something that brought him great joy, as he hated that grotesque form of rotting flesh. Once that was done, he headed to the galaxy where his planet's solar system should be. He was absolutely thrilled, euphoric and happy. After so long, he was going to see his friends again, the most important people in his life. If he could still, he would be crying with happiness and excitement. It took him no time at all to find his way, and in less than 1,000th of a second, he had entered the solar system, only to find a huge surprise. Where was the Earth? I almost let out a nervous laugh at the sight. I could barely distinguish it from the two small dots next to it. Since when was their planet so small? Had it always been like this? He knew that the Earth was not the center of the universe, not even close, but after seeing the whole cosmic panorama, and that view of the solar system, he could not believe that his home looked like something so small, so insignificant. They were there. Their friends, their problems, their lives, the places they visited were there, the people they met were there, in that small and almost imperceptible point. Those thoughts gave him a slight chill, but he quickly ignored it. He shouldn't focus on that kind of things, small or not. His home was back. His friends were back at this point. Nothing could ruin it. How wrong I was. The moment he got down to the planet, he knew something was wrong. He could feel it even in the air. But he ignored it. He just wanted to see his friends, so he looked for them and found them quickly, only to get the biggest and most horrible surprise of all. They weren't their friends. They looked like them, they had their faces, their voices, but their personalities weren't theirs. Their personalities were twisted to a point where I simply didn't know how to describe it, their flaws raised to the 1,000th power, and what made them themselves had completely disappeared. This sight had left him completely in shock. But, within that surprise, an enormous fury and disgust towards those things had begun to grow within him. But this was also directed towards himself, perhaps unconsciously, as he was their creator. Those were not his friends, they did not act in such a pathetic way, they were nothing more than copies, horrible, poorly made copies, a mere failed attempt. At that moment, he could not hold back, he let out a scream to the four winds, a scream that let out all the pain, the fury, the helplessness and the frustration that he had been keeping inside for so long. At the same time, he released a great amount of his cosmic power, and in less than 1,000,000th of a second, the light covered all his creation, erasing it even on a conceptual level, ending that world and those aberrant creations, returning once again to that white void. Once he managed to calm down, he couldn't believe what he had done, he was simply in shock. The previous universes had collapsed on themselves because of how poorly made they were, but this one was different, it was he who had destroyed it. He had just done something horrible, erasing countless lives from existence, an act so horrible that he simply couldn't uncover it, but that wasn't the worst part. He had destroyed his home, and his friends. No. That wasn't his home, and those weren't his friends. They were just a copy, a cheap, bad copy, being so aberrant that they dared to impersonate the most important people in her life. This only showed him that he had to keep practicing, keep trying so that the next world he created would be the right one, so that in that attempt, he could not create a copy, but bring back his friends and his home. And that's what he did. I try. I create, I destroy. testing different parameters. Again and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, bucking again. He was learning more and more about his abilities, gaining more control and experience. But it just didn't seem to work, each attempt resulting in a twisted version of his world and his beloved friends. However, he was never going to give up. He would keep trying to bring his friends back and give them all the happy ending they so deserve. He's fine. You're not. He is a good person. It isn't true. They are just copies. They are people. He's just trying to save his friends and his world. Because if he accepted what he had done, if he accepted his guilt, if he accepted the fact that he was being the bad guy, that means he had been committing mass genocide millions of times, killing and erasing innocent people from existence. His own friends and family, the people he loved most in the whole world. But if Naruto accepted this, he would also be accepting that he is a monster, one much worse than Obito, Madara, or the Otsutsuki themselves, and that he lost the only thing he had left and what he was desperately clinging to: his identity. Without realizing it, he had immersed himself in a lie, seeking to escape the horrible actions he was carrying out. A lie that he repeated over and over again, each time he eliminated a new universe and all the life that was in it, considering them copies or failed attempts. He thinks that the end justifies the means, because from his point of view, in his damaged and twisted mind, also affected by the time he spent wandering in nothingness, he is doing the right thing. It's true that he was killing and erasing many life forms, but could they even be considered life forms? Although he did create them, they were just a failed attempt. But in the end, Naruto Uzumaki had long since lost his humanity, both literally and metaphorically. Even after all this time, he still held on to one thing: his identity. No matter what actions he did, he was still Naruto Uzumaki. Although he had changed in some ways, he still retained the qualities that had always defined him, and would always define him. Naruto Uzumaki never breaks a promise, Naruto never gives up, Naruto never abandons his own. As long as he continued like that, he would still be Naruto Uzumaki, he would still retain his identity. However, after a simply indescribable amount of time, committing acts of destruction on a cosmic scale, not to mention ending up physically becoming a monster, he is anything but human, he is anything but Naruto Uzumaki. Although he does not realize it. He was desperate, broken, wanting to hold on to that identity, wanting to convince himself that he was still Naruto, that everything he did, that all that death and destruction would eventually have its reward, that in the end he could bring them back and give them the happiness they so deserve. Sometimes he would wonder, as he watched several of his creations trying to become gods in a path of greed. At this, he would look at himself and wonder if he had ascended to divinity. He could create universes and do things that no one else could. Technically, he was a cosmic entity. But he was not God. A god is an omnipotent being, capable of performing the greatest feats effortlessly, while he was not even capable of creating his universe as he wanted. If he truly were a god, he would have managed to fulfill his long-awaited goal on the first attempt. He was not God. He was just someone with a lot of power. In some of the universes that I created, I saw how people worshipped him as a god, they adored him, they built monuments to him, and even prayed to him, as if he were some kind of superior being. That was unpleasant. It was uncomfortable and even repulsive to be seen in that way. He always wanted to be Hokage, but only because he believed that in this way he would gain the respect of his village so that they would no longer look at him with pity and contempt. He never wanted to have that power, he never wanted to be seen as a god, he never wanted to become a horrible and grotesque cosmic entity. What's more, becoming Hokage was never his main dream, at most it was the method he chose to achieve his second most important dream. His first and greatest wish was to start a family, and have friends so that he would never be alone again. Maybe that's why being alone for so long in the nothingness caused his mind to deteriorate so much. That's why he's so obsessed with restoring his universe and seeing his friends again. Because that way he wouldn't only be saving them, but he would be achieving what he most longed for in his entire life. While Naruto was floating in the void, after destroying another failed universe, he practiced with his powers, getting better and better at using them, all in order to achieve his goal. But in one of those moments, something happened. The dominion he had over his cosmic consciousness extended beyond the limits of his creation, reaching corners of existence he never thought possible. It was at that moment that he discovered the existence of universes outside of his creation. He had discovered the existence of the multiverse. This discovery completely changed his vision of existence. His universe was not the only one, and there were an infinite number of universes out there. That new discovery seemed fascinating to him, although he could not see all the universes, only those closest to his own, but even so he could see impressive worlds, from wizards to extremely powerful alien races, and even other gods, very different from the god he had devoured, some weaker and others stronger. But what caught his attention and fascinated him the most was discovering that there were universes very similar to his own, if not almost identical. Worlds where his friends were alive, where even his parents were alive. There were also some rare cases, like versions where his world seemed to be mixed with others, and he had even seen scenarios so strange that they intrigued him, like one where the inhabitants of an entire world were taken to a movie theater to see other universes by some kind of cosmic entity. The possibilities were endless. It was just amazing. For a second, a dark thought popped into his mind. What if he went to one of those worlds and took the place of that variant of himself? This way, he could have his loved ones back and not poorly made copies. It sounded so tempting. He didn't think it would be difficult for him to find a way to access the multiverse, if he was already able to see nearby universes with his cosmic consciousness. Opening a portal should be simple. However, that idea was discarded almost instantly. If he did it, he would be doing nothing more than abandoning his friends for some variants of himself from another universe. Naruto Uzumaki did not replace his friends, he always remained loyal to them. But that fascinating discovery turned into something extremely terrifying when he began to think things through more carefully. His universe was only one of an infinite number of worlds. It was much less than a small grain of sand on the largest of all beaches. That fact made a horrible feeling of inferiority and insignificance run through him. He believed that he had become the most powerful thing in existence, but it turned out that he was not at all. The fact that there were an infinite number of worlds meant that there could be an infinite number of beings much stronger than him, beings that could come to his world and ruin all his plans. This discovery made him realize the enormous danger that messing with the multiverse represented. He was less than a grain of sand. He didn't have the slightest knowledge about what kind of beings could be out there. From his perspective, the multiverse had become a kind of dark forest, where if he made the slightest false move, he could end up attracting someone's attention, and he didn't know if that someone could be good or bad. In fact, the first message you receive from another universe may be a warning. Stop trying to communicate, they will hear you. That discovery only made the creator more upset and nervous, as if his mental state was not already deteriorated enough. Now he also had to always be on alert for anything, being careful not to use his power too much, this to avoid beings close to his universe sensing it, and being able to detect it. He had become the first and last line of defense to prevent the beings of the multiverse from discovering his existence, and that of his world. Luckily, they seemed to be insignificant enough that no one noticed him destroying and recreating his world over and over again. He didn't know if this was something common or not in the cosmos, but he didn't care. He had to be careful, all to protect his world. When creating a new universe, they always tried hard to make it perfect. However, there were always numerous mistakes everywhere. These mistakes varied in number and importance, from some people changing gender, to some important events never happening, such as the Uchiha massacre never happening, this being one of the most common examples. Things also happened like, the personalities of some people changed so much that those who were once good people ended up becoming complete psychopaths. The same thing happened with those bad people who ended up being pacifist and kind people. This made no sense. They were nothing more than mistakes that had to be corrected, so that their original world could return. Everything had to be perfect. Everything, down to the smallest detail, everything had to be exactly identical. He believed that these mistakes were due to the fact that he did not know what the childhood, or entire life of the vast majority was like. If he omitted some important moment in someone's life, they could end up becoming someone completely different, which only made things even more complicated for his target. But there was one detail, one mistake that was always repeated in each and every one of his creations, one that was beginning to bother and frustrate him more and more. Sasuke. For some reason that even he couldn't understand, the one who was once his friend always managed to remember, having visions about the things he had done. These didn't follow any specific order, they just appeared at some point in his life, whether when he was a child or when he was already an old man. It didn't matter what the variant was, good, bad, man, woman, or whatever, he always remembered it sooner or later. He didn't understand it, he didn't know how this was possible, nobody was supposed to know this, they weren't supposed to know, they wouldn't understand. But he always managed to remember it sooner or later. Every time he remembered, he personally took charge of eradicating it, erasing it, always with the hope that in the next world he created, he wouldn't be able to remember anything. But it was all in vain, the damn thing kept remembering, making his job only more difficult than it already was. Not only the visions, he had become so damn desperate and perfectionist that he was not able to accept even a single error or failure. If there was something that was not exactly the same as his original world was, he ended up erasing the entire universe. The only exceptions he made were with those worlds where everyone looked so happy. Even when their personalities were so different, to the point of disgusting him, they still had their faces, inevitably reminding him of those friends he lost a long time ago. Maybe it was out of compassion, maybe out of pity, maybe out of guilt, or maybe it was that small fragment of humanity deep within him, but with those worlds he decided not to destroy them. Not immediately. In those rare worlds, he would simply go into the deepest part of space to sleep, erasing everyone's memory, so that they would forget his existence, letting them enjoy their lives, until with the passage of time, they would die of old age and humanity itself would disappear due to the natural cycle of life, becoming extinct. For an entity like him, a few million years would fly by while he slept. Once he woke up, he would go to Earth, which he always found uninhabited by intelligent life, and then erase the universe and start from scratch. In one of the many worlds, Naruto got tired and decided to tell him the truth about what had happened to him and why he did everything, only to then fuse him with him, destroying that variant in body, mind and soul, while he fused him with his own existence, making him disappear completely just like he did with the Otsutsuki's themselves and with God. He had done this in the hope that the following versions of Sasuke could no longer remember the things he had done, so that he could get rid of his biggest problem, believing that in this way, he would solve that error in his creation. He was wrong. The Uchiha continued remembering, and this only increased the desperation within him. His fear of being alone and never seeing his friends again increased more and more with each attempt. But he wasn't going to give up. He couldn't do it. Naruto never felt any real affection or care for the variants he created. Seeing that they were nothing like his real friends, he simply dismissed them as failed attempts. It was simply impossible for him to feel affection for such twisted and even disgusting versions of his loved ones. In his eyes, they were just defective copies. However, although he never felt a real and genuine affection for them, what he did feel was an enormous guilt for having erased them. Despite everything, they were still living beings. But he did not accept it. He hid in the lie he told himself, and most importantly, that they all resembled his friends. Every time he destroyed the universe and erased them all, he relived the moment he lost everything, remembering the first time he lost them, the time he failed them, his greatest fault, having lost the people he loved most in the whole world. And that guilt has affected him much more than he believes. Another universe, another failed attempt to add to the list. He decided to let them enjoy their lives. He went to the deepest part of space, sleeping while the cycle of life occurred on that small planet, until he woke up. But he was fed up. He tried after try and kept failing. This was the 700 millionth attempt. He went to Earth to end everything. He always did the same thing, go to the place where Konoha was to destroy everything and start over. But this time things were a little different. Frustration, anger, despair, a huge whirlpool of negative emotions was stirring strongly inside him. He was fed up, and it began to affect him. His mental state was so deteriorated that it even began to affect his powers. His frustration, anger, and desperation made him lose control of his powers for a second, causing him to begin releasing massive amounts of cosmic radiation. That energy spread throughout the planet in less than a blink of an eye, beginning to kill off all animal and even plant life on the planet, while the water and air on the planet became seriously contaminated. However, the worst part was already happening to him, because in that moment of frustration, he lost concentration and his physical body began to deteriorate, to the point where it began to melt as if it were a candle. Naruto could feel it. It didn't cause him pain, but it did make it very difficult for him to maintain his physical form. Although his body did not need to rest, his damaged mind was still that of a human, and he was mentally exhausted, carrying an indescribable amount of stress. His legs began to melt, leaving a trail of some sort of fleshy, radioactive slime wherever he went as he headed deeper into the forest, heading towards the place where his village once stood. He could feel every part of his body deteriorating and melting, to the point where he could barely stand, reaching a point where his legs were so fragile that he fell to his knees, beginning to pant heavily. At the same time his vision became cloudy. And despite the pitiful state his physical body was in, he managed to see something in front of him that left him in complete and utter shock. Sasuke, was the soft whisper that the cosmic being said, while he looked in disbelief at the spectral figure standing a few meters in front of him. Indeed, it was the figure of Sasuke Uchiha, only this one looked and even felt different from all the variants he had created. And he quickly realized why. The black-haired man looked to be about 18 years old, wearing that classic purple and white suit that he always wore, but what completely caught his attention was the fact that it was pierced by what seemed to be bone stakes that he recognized instantly. Not to mention, the black-haired man looked at him with an expression full of disdain, pity and even disappointment. Naruto felt his entire body freeze at the sight. For a second he was completely paralyzed, not knowing what to say at what he was seeing. What was he seeing? It couldn't be the ghost of the original Sasuke. He had been erased in body, mind, soul and even concept. But a part of him knew, deep down, he knew that what he was seeing was no ghost. What was in front of him was the purest representation of the guilt that was in his heart, how he believed his old friend would react to seeing what he became. It was the reminder of what he did, and as long as he continues to deny the guilt, he will continue to see it. It's all in his mind. He's fighting with himself, his subconscious and that little piece of humanity trying to tell him what's wrong. But Naruto doesn't want to accept his mistake. He won't. Confusion turned to fury, as he struggled to stand, to no avail as his legs continued to melt and fall apart. "Don't look at me like that, I'm trying to save you, I'm doing all this for you." That scream full of fury came out in a completely monstrous and distorted voice, as if thousands of souls in torment were speaking at the same time. Completely enraged, he transformed his arms into two whips made of rotten flesh, attacking that projection, only to see how his attacks pierced the ghost, who did not flinch in the slightest at that, continuing to maintain his look of disappointment and disdain on the creator. Once his attack ended, he watched in surprise as his right hand fell off, turning into a puddle of steaming slime on the ground, a sign of how it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to maintain his physical form, losing more and more control of his powers due to his unstable mind, only managing to hurt himself. Trembling from the purest helplessness, he couldn't stand it any longer and fell to the ground, his half-melted arms clinging to the earth as his gasps could be heard throughout the forest, gasps which seemed to be mixed with sobs, while Sasuke continued to look at him with disdain, in a way that even made him look imposing in front of the cosmic being. Naruto didn't need to see him to know that he was still looking at him with disdain, and a part of him, unconsciously, knows that he doesn't even deserve to be judged, because he knows that he is so pathetic that he doesn't deserve anything other than contempt. At that moment, on that small planet, in that forest and illuminated by the moonlight that filtered through the trees, as if reality itself was mocking its creator, Naruto was shown what he really was. He is not a cosmic being, he is not a deity or supreme being, he is just someone completely broken, desperate and pathetic who clings to something he lost a long time ago. Even in that situation, he only began to crawl with difficulty on the ground, passing by Sasuke, continuing on his way, while the black-haired man could only close his eyes at this. "I need to keep trying." Again, I was ignoring the guilt. After several minutes, he was finally able to cross the forest, reaching the area where the great village of Konoha once stood. But his body was getting worse. His legs had long since detached from his body, remaining as masses of steaming slime in that forest. Managing to get out of it, he was still crawling, getting closer to the center of that valley. However, he stopped for a second, glancing at something that caught his attention. It was that vision of Sasuke again, only this time he wasn't alone, but was accompanied by several people he recognized instantly. Hiruzen, Iruka, Kakashi, Jiraiya, Sakura, Hinata, Tsunade, each and every one of the most important people to him, were there, even his own parents, like ghosts watching him from a distance, all of them having expressions of disappointment and disdain plastered on their faces as they saw the pathetic and disgusting state he was in. "Oh, shut up," was the only thing he said to them, his voice distorted and panting at the same time, barely able to maintain his physical form, before continuing to crawl on the ground like a disgusting worm. After a few minutes, he finally managed to reach the middle of that valley, completely ignoring the gazes of those spectral figures. He stared at that place, while for a second it seemed that the village where he was born and raised was there again, but it was nothing more than his mind playing tricks on him. He didn't say another word, already knowing what he had to do. A blinding and powerful white light came out of his body, a simply beautiful light, so pure white that no one would believe it was possible. That was the most powerful technique he had in his arsenal, a light that was capable of erasing everything, be it matter, mind, soul, and even the very concepts of existence. This technique had a name: Astral Draft. With that scream, that beautiful and powerful light covered every corner of the universe, the sky and the circles of hell, completely disappearing them from existence, leaving only that white and infinite void. I must continue trying. All those memories were going through Naruto's mind, who was still sleeping deeply in the emptiness of space, his presence alone generating the existence of the great attractor. He was waiting for life on Earth to disappear again, so he could go and start creating a new universe. Hopefully the next one would be the ideal one. He would be able to bring his friends back. He was going to make it, and nothing and no one would stand in his way. His friends and his home would return, and they would get the happy ending they so deserve. It was a promise he had made to himself and his deceased friends. Naruto Uzumaki never broke a promise. Naruto Uzumaki never abandoned his own. Naruto Uzumaki. He would never give up. Chapter 7: The Lament of a Variant. God is all we have. He is our all-powerful Father. He is a guide in our lives, our guardian angel, a God on earth. In short, He is all we have. But for God we mean nothing. In the village of Konoha, the village hidden among the leaves, there is a young boy of about 13 years old, belonging to one of the most powerful and respected clans of all, the Uchiha clan. This young man's name is Sasuke Uchiha. For the past few weeks, the young black-haired boy has been having several nightmares, but these were not like other nightmares he had had before. They were not those strange and even creepy dreams that anyone could have on a bad night. Not at all. Those dreams were simply disturbing. No, in fact, that definition fell extremely short to describe the sensations that the poor boy was experiencing. It all started on a normal night, with absolutely nothing special. That day was a normal and quiet one, training with his father and attending the ninja academy, being the best in his class, being respected by everyone. But it was on that night that everything would change forever in the life of that young man. He had woken up in the middle of the cold and silent night. The light of the moon and the stars peeked through the windows, allowing him to better see his surroundings. His body feeling the cold night air, causing him to shiver slightly as he just woke up. However, the reality was that it was nothing more than a deceptive dream, a dream in which he believed he had woken up in his room. That may sound strange, but it was reality, a fact that the young Uchiha was experiencing. In that situation, Sasuke realized something that instantly alerted him, and that was that he was completely motionless in his bed. It wasn't just paralysis, it went much further. He literally couldn't move a single muscle in his body, to the point where he couldn't even blink. His lips were sealed, preventing him from making any kind of sound, whether it was to ask for help or express a thought out loud. But that wasn't the worst part at all. What really disturbed and confused the black-haired man was the fact that he didn't seem to have the need to breathe. The feeling was overwhelming and terrifying at the same time. It was as if his own body was not paying attention to him, as if his very being refused to breathe, even though he wanted to. And even stranger, the fact that he didn't seem to need to do so only made him more confused, but it didn't take away from the fact that the experience was simply disturbing and desperate. Experiencing something like this every night only drove the young black-haired man's mind into a spiral of despair and absolute terror, not understanding absolutely anything of what was happening. What Sasuke was feeling was the oldest fear of humanity, the greatest fear of all. The fear of the unknown. I didn't know what was happening, I didn't know what it was, I didn't know how to deal with it, I didn't know absolutely anything. And that is, without a doubt, the most terrifying thing a human being can experience in their entire life. In that situation, Sasuke could see that he was in his room. It was exactly the same. Every little, tiny detail, no matter how small, was the same, even the kunais he had left in a corner before going to sleep. Everything was the same. But despite that, his own being knew that was not his room. It was as if he were in a place that pretended to be his room, something he simply did not understand. As if the whole situation wasn't worrying and confusing enough, those emotions only increased when he felt the bed beneath him begin to move on its own, shaking slightly before beginning to float a couple of centimeters off the ground as if it were a horror movie. But it was at that moment that Sasuke's true nightmare began. What he had experienced up until that very moment had been absolutely nothing compared to what was to come in just a few brief moments, like the calm before the storm, like a silent and deadly warning before a true disaster fell upon the poor young man, who, ignorant of what was about to happen, was only confused at not being able to understand what was happening. And at that very moment, it happened. The pupils in the Uchiha's eyes narrowed as he witnessed the event taking place in front of him. It was something he didn't know how to describe, something so simple in appearance, but at the same time he knew it was extremely incredible. His own being. His own existence knew that what he was witnessing was something extraordinary that no other person or being in the world would ever have the opportunity to dazzle in his entire life, or in 1,000 lives. What was that the young heir of the Uchiha clan was seeing? Well, the best way to describe it would be to call it a door, or maybe a window. To be honest, it couldn't be defined as either of those things, but at the same time it looked very similar to one. It was as if the very space in front of him, as if the very fabric of reality itself had opened up, striated in such a way that it seemed to be some kind of door, or rather a portal, and from that place came a blinding white light. No, that color was much more than just white. It was a color so bright that it felt like it was almost burning his retinas, a brightness so beautiful that he felt like crying from the purest joy at witnessing its beauty, as if he were seeing the brightness of a newborn star in the cold emptiness of space, illuminating the darkness of the cosmic firmament with its beautiful light. Sasuke saw that beautiful light for less than 1,000th of a second, an incredibly small fraction of time, but for him it seemed like an eternity of seeing the most beautiful phenomenon of his entire life. And it was at that moment that something strange happened. Something happened to the Uchiha. It was as if someone had grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him with a firm and strong tug. Only it wasn't his shirt that had been grabbed. He didn't know how to describe it. It was something intangible and invisible, beyond the human eye. Even if he could use his Sharingan, he wouldn't have been able to see it. It was as if a fishing hook had hooked onto his own soul and had dragged him into the depths of that blinding divine light. The black-haired man finally felt like he could move, and the first thing he did was cover his eyes tightly with both hands, feeling a burning, stabbing pain predominate in that area from the simple fact of seeing that light. And the moment he opened his eyes, he noticed a huge change. The next thing Sasuke experienced went beyond a simple dream or a nightmare. It was something he simply didn't know how to describe, an experience that affected more than just his own soul, involving his very existence, the very concept that formed him as a person. The moment he opened his eyes, he realized that he was not in his world. It was strange how he realized this. It was as if existence itself had transferred that information directly to his brain, which processed it in less than a blink of an eye. But still, he knew that the place where he found himself after seeing that light was not his world. It was an experience that repeated itself absolutely every night. Each time it was the same dream. However, the only thing that was different was the world to which his mind was sent. Each world that dazzled during the nights was different from the previous one, sometimes presenting minimal differences, while other times the changes were extreme, and others directly seemed to be taken from the craziest dreams and nightmares that a person could imagine. There were worlds where technology was hundreds or thousands of times more advanced than what existed at home, in others not much. There were even worlds where history, the very laws of physics, and reality itself were completely different. All of this, those astral journeys that the young black-haired man had experienced, had made him change his perspective on reality, on the existence around him, now his mind being able to slightly understand a part of the infinite possibilities of worlds that were out there, beyond what his human eyes could see. Sasuke was now aware that there was much more out there. While the black-haired man was in those worlds, it was as if he was part of that place, as if he had been born there. It was as if he was seeing everything through the eyes of someone who was part of that place. And something always happened that scared him. On several occasions there was something. Or rather, someone who appeared and finished him off. Something he didn't know how to describe, something that was like a force of existence itself that always haunted him. No matter where he hid, no matter how much he ran, no matter how much power he had or who he allied himself with, no matter if he managed to gather entire armies under his command, that thing, that abomination that should never have existed, always ended up destroying him and all his efforts. He could never get a good look at what it looked like. He only knew that that thing appeared a few minutes after Sasuke arrived in that new reality. It always appeared out of nowhere, without any kind of sign or warning. It was as if the Uchiha blinked, and the moment he opened his eyes, that thing was already behind him, ready to finish him off. As the days passed and that experience was repeated, the image of that thing was becoming clearer, as if it were a blurry memory. I was beginning to remember, seeing how what was once a shadow lacking a fixed form, was now assuming a more humanoid appearance. In turn, he was seeing and witnessing the different actions and encounters that the creature had with him. Some hated the being with every part of their being, abandoning everything in order to find the power to defeat and kill the thing. They abandoned their friends, their family, their clan, and even their own humanity, all to gain power and kill the being. Others took positions of incredible power, gathering entire armies under their command, declaring war on the monster. None of them succeeded. That thing had killed them without even having to lift a finger, as if all the power they had meant absolutely nothing, showing them that everything they had done, everyone they had abandoned, and everything they had given up, made it more than clear that it had all been in vain. No one could stand up to him. He watched as others took a different path. Instead of facing the being face to face, they decided to try to negotiate with it, asking it to give them another chance, begging it in total and utter desperation to spare the lives of their world and family, some even trying to reach the being, to empathize with it so that it would reconsider its decisions. Nothing. They achieved nothing. They all perished, consumed by that beautiful light that the being emanated. They disappeared from reality along with their entire world. And others. They just gave up. They couldn't stand the idea that something of such magnitude existed, so they didn't even bother to fight. They dedicated themselves to enjoying the time they had left, spending it with their loved ones. Some managed to be happy, start a family, and even die a natural death due to old age. Apparently, that being spared the lives of some worlds, letting them enjoy their lives while at the same time making them disappear. As more visions passed, little by little his image became clearer, until in the last one that Sasuke had, he could finally see the appearance of that abomination, and what he saw was something he had not expected at all. His classmate, Naruto Uzumaki, his appearance was exactly the same, only his face was now a completely deformed mass of flesh, without any feature that could define him as human. And it was at that precise moment, when he saw the creature's face, that everything finally came to his mind. As if it were a thick fog that filled his mind, preventing him from remembering something he knew was very important. Well, the exact moment he saw that deformed mass of flesh that Naruto had for a face, was when the fog in his mind finally disappeared, letting all the memories come back to him, hitting him with the force of a huge and devastating avalanche. Naruto, the only one who survived. The Otsutsuki's God. And above all, the reset of the universes. He could finally understand everything. He could understand the truth of the universe, the reason for Naruto's actions. All of that. It was nothing more than a desperate attempt to recover the original universe and those he lost. He realized that during all that time, in those visions, he was seeing the memories of his previous variants, the old Sasukes who tried to fight Naruto, who tried to convince him to change, and those who simply gave up. And honestly, I couldn't blame the latter. After all, how did you defeat God? How could you defeat something that was the very source? That from which all existing powers, techniques, and abilities were born? I couldn't. It was just impossible. That truth hit the black-haired man like a train, feeling like his whole world was being destroyed, metaphorically speaking. He realized that he was absolutely nothing, that his own existence was nothing more than a simple and pure accident. His life, the lives of his friends, clan and family, meant absolutely nothing. They were not unique, they were not special, they were just one more attempt in the long list of hundreds of millions of attempts that Naruto had made. And the worst thing was that they were another failed attempt, and it was almost certain that this being would destroy them sooner or later, and neither their souls nor the other world would remain intact. If they were not destroyed now, it would be when humanity disappeared due to the passage of time. But for a cosmic entity of such level, a few million years were a blink of an eye. The young Uchiha was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't even realize he had woken up from his dream. It wasn't until he heard a voice he knew perfectly, a voice that always brought him peace and tranquility. "Sasuke, are you still sleeping? Wake up, you'll be late for the Ninja Academy." A female voice was heard on the other side of the young man's door, a sweet and motherly voice that the young Uchiha knew perfectly. That voice, the voice of his beloved mother, was enough to bring him out of his thoughts, but not enough to calm him, not enough to make that feeling of deep fear and helplessness disappear from his being. "I'm awake, Mom, I'm coming down." Without saying anything else, he would leave his room and go down to the kitchen, where he would see his family having breakfast peacefully. He immediately knew this was one of those universes where the Uchiha massacre had not happened, therefore, his family was still intact and he did not have those traumas that Itachi caused him. As in other worlds, his brother had still decided to remain a ninja, only he was not as loyal to Konoha as he was in the original universe. Sasuke could only have a sad look at that. They were nothing more than copies. They were not the first nor the last attempt. They and their lives were not unique. They were not valuable. In the end, they were just one more of the bunch. Without saying a single word, the 12-year-old would sit next to his older brother and begin to eat his breakfast calmly and slowly, looking up to see his family all interacting together. A slight smile escaped his lips as he watched his father talk to Itachi. While both had small smiles on their faces, he didn't even know what they were saying, but they looked happy, and that was enough for him. Sasuke, the slightly worried voice of his mother, caught the attention of the aforementioned, who turned to look at her. "Is everything okay? I see you very thoughtful," the black-haired woman would say, her expression showing the love and maternal concern of a good mother. The young black-haired boy would only give a sad smile when he saw the woman, knowing that in other worlds she had been a completely different person, with different lives and different personalities. In fact, in some they were not even related. So he could only be thankful that, in that attempt, she had turned out to be a good person, very similar to the Mikoto of the original universe. "Yes, Mom. Everything is fine." It was a lie. Once the family finished breakfast, Sasuke and Itachi prepared to leave. The older brother had a mission with his friend 𝙬𝙖, who was still alive in that world, while the younger Uchiha had everything ready for the Ninja Academy. However, he stopped at the door of his home. He quickly turned around and ran to his father, and did something that surprised the adult. "I hug him. I love you, Dad." That had pleasantly surprised the patriarch of the family, and leader of the Uchiha clan, who had not expected such an action from his youngest son, and even less those words. But in order not to seem insensitive, even having his wife happily watching that scene, he decided to reciprocate his son's hug. "I love you too, Sasuke," the man told him, while a loving smile appeared on his face, looking at his youngest son, one of his two greatest prides, although he was too proud to say it out loud. Regaining his composure, Fugaku coughed into one of his hands, once again standing up straight and with his serious face, typical of almost any member of the Uchiha clan, which made Mikoto laugh amused. Now, it would be best if you went to the academy, you'll be late. Sasuke just nodded at his father's words, before leaving his home and starting to walk through the streets of the Uchiha district, seeing the different members of his clan doing their respective tasks. A melancholic and sad face appeared again on his childish features, while the memories of that Uchiha massacre that occurred in most of the previous worlds came to his mind like a horrendous flash of light. He was grateful that at least this time he had a world where his family and clan were alive, otherwise, he would have ended up just as crazy and deranged as the rest of the Sasukes. Before he even realized it, the black-haired man had already left the Uchiha compound, but he had no plans to go to the academy, not at all. He knew he had to go see him. He wanted to know how much time he had left in that world. He didn't even know how long he was walking. It was as if his own body was moving automatically, as if it knew perfectly well where it had to go, as if it had walked that path thousands of times. The next thing the young Uchiha heir knew was that he was inside the forest of death, seeing that in front of him there was a small hill, and on top of it, a figure that he knew perfectly, with his back to him. As if it were a horrible parallel, the mortal being beneath his creator, watching as he landed above him, being bathed by the beautiful rays of the sun that illuminated his figure, a twisted parody of the dark and sickly truth that hid that childish figure. So here you are back. Naruto's completely calm and serene voice brought the black-haired man out of his thoughts, who couldn't help but feel a deep fear just by hearing and seeing that cosmic monster in human form. His voice alone denoted how natural the situation was for him, one he had experienced thousands, if not millions, of times. So, what will it be this time, Variant? A speech with hatred and fury overflowing in every word, a desperate plea for me to spare the life of this world. Or perhaps you will try to attack me from behind in your desperation. I would recommend you not to do that last thing. I would prefer to avoid having to kill you myself. The cosmic entity's voice was soft and completely relaxed in every word and sentence that came out of his mouth, a tone as smooth as silk of the highest quality, but at the same time transmitting an aura of power impossible to notice, making anyone tremble with the simple fact of hearing it, knowing perfectly well that they should not mess with him. And that was precisely what was happening to Sasuke, who felt his legs shaking like jelly beneath him, having to use all his willpower to remain standing, feeling his lower lip tremble as well, a product of the enormous fear he felt at being in front of the creator of the universe. Don't take it personally. Versions of you tried to attack me from behind, believing that a simple kunai could even tickle them. But you already have all your memories unlocked, you know what happened. You seem to be much smarter than other versions, good for you. At least you didn't come out being an arrogant extremist, or an inept mommy's boy like other of your previous variants. The creator's tone became more intense as he mentioned some of his previous failed attempts. His voice filled with a deep disgust at remembering those variants, sounding like he was about to vomit just by mentioning them. All while the black-haired man listened to everything in complete silence. In the end, they were nothing more than mistakes. They tarnished the name of my friends. Those last words spoken by the cosmic being seemed to bother the black-haired man quite a bit. Although he was not the best person in the world, he could not understand how Naruto spoke of the lives of those people as if they were a mistake, all just because it was not how he wanted it. That thought bothered him, enough for him to take the little courage he had and finally open his mouth to speak to the creator of the universe, who continued to turn his back, looking at the clear sky as if it were the most beautiful and interesting spectacle in all of existence. Are you sure they are the ones who are tarnishing your friends' names? That question came out of Sasuke's mouth, his voice a mix of seriousness, indignation and fear, the latter trying to be suppressed as much as possible. That action of the black-haired man slightly caught the attention of the blonde, who seemed to be watching him out of the corner of his eye, although his face could not be clearly distinguished due to the sunlight that hit him directly. The Uchiha felt a chill when he saw that the cosmic being had fixed its attention on him, but even so, he decided to continue talking, clinging to the little courage he managed to accumulate. You plan to bring back your universe, but in the process you have destroyed millions of other worlds, ending countless lives. you have become the greatest genocidal that has ever existed. Not even pain, 𝕬𝕦𝕦𝕬𝕦𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 with each word he said, his frown reflecting the annoyance he felt when saying the inhuman acts that being had caused. It's a small price to pay, when the reward is that they come back. Naruto spoke, his voice calm at the black-haired man's words, while the sun's rays began to be covered by some clouds. And so you'll be satisfied? Sooner or later you'll be able to bring your world and your friends back, but it will be thanks to the biggest and most horrible act of genocide that could have ever existed. What will you do if they find out about this? The young Uchiha questioned him with his brow furrowed in annoyance and indignation, desperately trying to hide his nerves and fear towards him. They don't have to find out, they won't. I guarantee you that. Naruto's voice suddenly turned serious, the sun's rays completely covered by the clouds, causing his body to be totally covered by the shadows they produced, while the atmosphere became heavy and cold, as if everything was reacting to the mood of the creator of the universe. Sasuke couldn't help but put on an expression that perfectly mixed the surprise and sadness he felt at that moment, after having heard the words come out of Naruto's mouth. Although he knew that he wasn't the Sasuke who met the blonde in front of him, he couldn't help but regret how low the blonde had fallen. Naruto, you have deformed yourself in search of an impossible goal to achieve, he said sadly and feeling sorry for the cosmic entity. Although he knew that it hated that others felt sorry for it, it is time for you to finally stop this madness. Heh. A laugh escaped from the cosmic monster at this, an almost rusty sound, as if it was something he hadn't done in a long time, but it wasn't a funny laugh, but an empty laugh, a broken sound from someone broken. In a way, Naruto couldn't help but laugh at that attempt of that variant to try to make him change his mind. He wasn't like Pain or Obito, who gave up on their goals with just a lecture. He wouldn't turn back after coming this far. And tell me, why should I do that? The blonde asked with a certain mocking tone, still turning his back on his creation. So that your friends can rest in peace. The moment those words left the Uchiha's lips, he knew that Naruto had heard him. He also knew that bringing up that subject was dangerous. Other variants of him had tried and the blonde had ignored them at best. Maybe it was the desperation of the moment that made him bring up that subject, but there was no turning back now. The already cold and heavy atmosphere only became even denser, seeing how the creator became firm and tense at those words. My friends. They're gone. Don't you understand? Naruto's words came out almost as a whisper. His voice was noticeably distressed, something he tried to hide almost desperately, failing in the attempt, since Sasuke could notice it. I failed them. I couldn't protect them and I must fix that. The entity's words sounded painful and choked, denoting how that pain was still fresh in his heart. The lump in his throat only made it more difficult for him to speak. But even so, Sasuke did not stop and continued talking. They loved you, your parents, Iruka, Jiraiya, they loved you. It would break their hearts if they saw what you've become. With his trembling hand, Naruto would take something out of one of his pockets, this being a small photo, that same photo of him with his loved ones that he had searched for in a previous universe, in the universe where he revealed the truth to that variant of Sasuke. That photo was created by the blonde himself, as a beautiful reminder of why he kept trying, why he kept going, an image of the most important people in his entire life. Even his parents were in that photo. You can go, variant. You are of no use to me. Enjoy your life. I will let time consume you and this planet. Only then will I destroy this failed attempt to try again. Consider it a gift of mercy for your world being the 999,999,999th attempt. Were the words spoken by the cosmic entity, while he put that photo back in his pockets, taking the greatest care possible, as if that photo were the greatest treasure in all existence. Sasuke could only lower his head in sadness and helplessness at the blonde's words, knowing that his universe was doomed. The fact that he was going to live barely comforted him a little, since he could spend his life with his family. Goodbye, Naruto. I wish you happiness, the young Uchiha would say, turning around with resignation, knowing that he couldn't do anything to make the entity change its mind. Happiness must be earned. And I'm going to earn mine. These were the last words the black-haired man heard from Naruto, before the cosmic being disappeared from that planet in a flash of his beautiful white light. The black-haired boy's footsteps echoed through the streets of the Uchiha complex as he returned home after that encounter he had with the cosmic entity. His head was down as his bangs cast a shadow over his face, not letting anyone see the defeated and completely hopeless expression he now possessed. He already had the answer. At least he and his family were going to live, they in complete ignorance of not knowing the truth of the universe and their own existence. That was something that Sasuke was envying at that moment with all his might, the fact that they would never know the horrible truth. That they were just one more failed attempt in Naruto's long list. They, their dreams, their goals, absolutely everything, were not unique or special, they were just one more of the bunch. And he was the one who got the short end of the stick. Although it could be said that they had been lucky, being one of the cases where Naruto would let them live until the human race became extinct, can that even be called life? Knowing that you, your loved ones and your entire world, are nothing more than a simple failure that will soon be destroyed. That everything you love, everything you fight for, your fears, your desires, your goals, your insecurities, absolutely none of it has value, because in the end you are nothing more than a failure in the eyes of your Creator. Living with that in mind. It's just not life. And the worst thing was that there was nothing he could do. Every effort to try to stop that thing would be in vain, always with the same result. Not even if he formed the largest army of all could he even face that abomination of the cosmos. The only thing Sasuke could do was surrender, resign himself to his imminent fate, his and his entire family's and the entire universe's. The fate that sooner or later everyone would disappear from existence itself. Sasuke. He just gave in. The black-haired boy would only arrive home in total silence, entering without paying the slightest attention to anyone, not his brother or his parents. He didn't even pay attention to them when they scolded him for not going to the academy that day. He didn't care how they found out. Maybe it was another one of the failures of reality that made them imperfect. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again," was all the young black-haired man said, before turning around and going up to his room. After what had happened that day, he didn't feel like doing anything. He just wanted to lie in his bed and not get out of there. If possible, he didn't want to get out of there until the universe disappeared, not caring in the least how stupid that sounded. All this under the worried eyes of his parents. The Uchiha couple was confused and intrigued by the attitude of their youngest son. They knew him perfectly and knew that something was happening to him. "Should I go talk to him?" Fugaku asked his wife, not knowing exactly how to proceed in that situation. "Let's give him his space for now. If we see that he continues like this, we will intervene," the Uchiha matriarch would say seriously, being equally worried about her son, but making the decision to give him his space so as not to overwhelm him. After that event, the days would pass in the blink of an eye, where Sasuke's attitude only worsened. His mind plunged into a great depression, something that was easily noticed by everyone who knew the young Uchiha heir. Some of his academy classmates tried to approach him, but he simply ignored them. Even his fangirls were confused and worried about the change in the young Uchiha's personality. But without a doubt, the most worried were his own parents, who had not the slightest idea of what could have happened for their son's personality to change to such a depressive one from one second to the next. On the other hand, the black-haired man was so immersed in his negative thoughts that he didn't even give importance to the concerns of others. Unlike them, he could remember everything. For some reason he still couldn't understand, that in fact not even Naruto himself understood, but he could do it. He remembered every world, every moment of each of its variants before him, their mistakes, their failures, their desperation, and their deaths at the hands of that thing. He never thought he could become so afraid of a person. The fear that previous variants had of Itachi was simply nothing compared to the terror caused by just thinking about that cosmic abomination that was now Naruto Uzumaki. He remembers the terror he felt just being in his presence. It was simply suffocating, as if invisible hands surrounded and squeezed his neck, depriving him of the power to breathe, an effect of being in the divine corrupt presence of that abomination that was anything but human. The very air that Sasuke breathed had him trembling. Every corner he saw made him jump in fear. A disturbing feeling of uneasiness and dread at the mere thought that he could be watching him invades his mind, enveloping him in a cloak of paranoia that he doesn't want to let go of. Sasuke can't take it anymore, he simply can't. Even though Naruto has let time eliminate the human race, that means that sooner or later he will destroy everything, including the other world. Not even the dead would be saved from his madness. Hatred was no longer of any use, the resentment that had driven the lives of millions of its variants, as if it were a constant engine of dwindling flames in the cold, dark night. Now it was extinguished by the storm that he represented, a storm that seeks in a sickly and twisted way to recover what it lost so long ago. Hatred, she had long since abandoned it. She was in no mood, no matter how much she hated it, it would not change anything. Millions of its previous variants, driven by hatred and revenge, were erased from reality itself as if they were nothing more than specks of dust before a mountain. Millions of memories flow like a river of lamentations and unspeakable horrors that take him to the brink of madness, making the idea of looking for the easiest way out cross his mind. However, as quickly as it came, it vanished. It would be of no use. Even in death, he could not escape from it, no matter what they call it. He is God, he rules over everything he created. It did not matter if he reached the highest point of heaven or the deepest part of the last circle of hell, nothing would be safe from him. That thing would never give up, would never leave them alone, all in pursuit of its twisted, rotten definition of a perfect world, a world that is exactly the same as the world it lost. Condemned. Sasuke and all life forms, absolutely everything and everyone in the universe were doomed. It was just a matter of time. Chapter 8. More than a variant. Space is a vast place, its size knows no bounds, filled with infinite wonders to discover, phenomena that very few mortal minds can ever fathom, let alone understand. Many dream of being able to travel there, to that dark ocean where the greatest mysteries of the universe are hidden from the sight of mere mortal eyes. The thought of venturing into the depths of the stars to discover what mysteries lie beyond their planet is something that leaves millions amazed. Space, a place that can be both terrifying and beautiful, depending on who you ask, but everyone will agree on one thing. And that is that out there, among the beautiful stars that light up the sky, millions of mysteries are hidden, the greatest enigmas of the entire universe, hidden in the depths of space, like ancient treasure hidden in a chest. Secrets that no mortal can even imagine, secrets older than the stars themselves, some so beautiful that they could make the hardest of men cry with joy and happiness, and others so horrible and nefarious that they seem taken from the deepest and most twisted nightmares of God. Ancient civilizations, unknown beings capable of devouring planets and stars as if they were mere snacks, cosmic phenomena that defy all logic or law of the universe. Space was an endless number of mysteries that left both amazed and terrified all thinking beings of all civilizations that had not yet ventured into the dark and unknown waters of that cosmic ocean. And it is precisely in that dark ocean, in that chest full of infinite mysteries, where the one that for many is the greatest secret of all existence is hidden, the truth that billions of philosophers and scholars throughout the ages have yearned to decipher. In their desire to satisfy their curiosity and hunger for forbidden knowledge that is beyond their mortal capacities. There, in that dark infinite ocean, God found himself flying, traveling through the vast cosmic garden that was his creation, after having had that conversation with the variant of Sasuke Uchiha that he had created. The cosmic being had spared the life of that planet and its creations. He simply decided that time itself and the natural cycle of life would take care of eliminating them. After all, a couple of million years were nothing to an entity like him, they were less than a simple blink of an eye. As the corrupt entity's colossal figure wandered through the infinite void of its universe, it bathed in the cosmic radiation emanating from the stars, dazzling the incomparable beauty of the various celestial bodies, its colossal figure creating slight distortions in reality itself as it moved. The humanoid figure made of rotten flesh that was God traveled at speeds that made the speed of light look ridiculous, seeing the different planets, solar systems, galaxies, and other stars that his universe contained. Even with all the flaws it had, he could not deny the great beauty of contemplating the fruit of his creation. A slight spark of pride was born in his deformed and grotesque being when contemplating the different planets that were in space. Slowing down, his figure of biblical proportions floated in front of several planets, which began to be affected by his mere presence. His colossal size emitted a force of gravity that affected those planets, which began to approach the body of the deity. Even seeing this, God did nothing. he just watched with a certain fascination as one of those planets floated in front of his deformed and hideous face, its size being such that that star could only be compared to what one of his eyes would be like, if he had any. So beautiful. I can never deny it, existence. It is something simply beautiful, no matter how many universes I create. The very nature of existence is something that will always leave me in awe. How the stars and the craziest cosmic phenomena are capable of existing, how life itself can arise even in the most hostile conditions, it is so incredible and so beautiful. The voice of the corrupted deity would resonate like an echo in the dark void of space, its sound able to be heard even without air, thanks to God's ability to play and manipulate reality itself at will. Naruto would be able to see how on that planet, floating in front of his face, there was life, not advanced, they were not even thinking beings, but they were still there, primitive beings that had not even learned to walk on two legs, but they were still there, small and weak animals, fighting for their survival on that planet where the beautiful and complex miracle that was life had been achieved. In several million years, those beings would evolve and become a stable species, which would hopefully manage to live for thousands of years, and that, the very miracle of life that he had allowed, was something so beautiful. But even so, he did not forget his main objective. No matter how beautiful it was, in the end, everything would perish by his own hand. It's a shame that you had to be born in a failed universe like this one, I feel bad for you. But in the end it will all be worth it for them. For the happy ending they deserve. It will all be worth it. God can't help it, his disgusting figure shudders in a sickening way as he hugs himself, letting out small laughs as he almost depravedly caresses his hideous face. They will come back. In the end, all of this will be worth it. They will come back, I will give them their happy ending. And we will all be happy, as it should have been from the beginning. The corrupted entity's laughter echoes through the solar system, an old and rusty sound, ancient and disgusting, twisted and disgusting like the cosmic entity's own appearance. A laugh that is the perfect reflection of Naruto's mental decline, like a fine crystal struggling to remain intact in the face of the storm, but that is slowly cracking. After a few seconds, God's eerie, macabre laughter would finally cease, leaving the dark, cold void of space silent again. He would simply retreat from that solar system, and with his sheer speed he would reappear on the surface of a hypermassive star some 20 billion years away. As his colossal figure walked as if nothing were happening on the surface of that star, as if it were normal ground, he could not help but get lost in his thoughts, while bathing in the light and radiation of that star. There were times when Naruto preferred to take refuge in the peace that came from being in solitary but beautiful environments, which would be lethal for any other mortal being. Nothing else could be in those places except him. Amidst the cosmic flares, several memories flashed through the corrupted entity's mind. How he had gone from being that imperious and naive child to being the cosmic entity he was now. So many things had happened, and everything had changed. Right? No. Things hadn't changed, he hadn't changed. He admits that he was no longer the same naive idiot as before, but despite his disgusting appearance, he was still the same. He was still that ninja who would give anything to protect those he loves. He was still Naruto Uzumaki. I am the same. I am still the same. I am still the same. These were the words that the cosmic being said to himself over and over again. He would try to push those thoughts away from his damaged mind, returning to concentrate on his great creation that was the universe. Looking up, he could see it, an independent space-time, the sky, where the good souls who had earned eternal rest and peace rested, a kingdom guarded by beings that were large gold hoops with hundreds of eyes and large white wings, which they called angels. And looking down, he saw the different circles of hell, each circle a space-time independent of the others, where the souls of the worst beings than their creation went, to be tormented forever by the grotesque beings that inhabited those realms, which they called demons. As the Creator continued to wander through the vast cosmos, he passed through several planets, where he managed to contemplate the vestiges of what was once a civilization. He could see several structures reduced to rubble, fallen monuments, ancient paintings on ruins. There was not much left, and no one but him to recognize the existence of such things. One of the many species, of the hundreds of millions of civilizations he had seen in the infinite universe he created, so many species. Some thought the gods had abandoned them, while others still had faith, falling to their knees as they prayed to the heavens, begging for their prayers to come true, mistaking random acts for miracles and good luck for prayers coming true. That caused a strange mix of sadness and nostalgia to the corrupt entity. The fact of seeing those thousands of civilizations praying to heaven, waiting for a miracle, made him very sad, because he knew that, no matter what name they gave to their respective religious figures, they were all praying to him, hoping to be saved. But if only they knew the truth, that he did not listen to a single one of those prayers, that none of their pleas were heard. Because God is not interested in them, God does not care about those races. It sounded and it was cruel, but it was the truth. God had only one goal in mind, and he was not going to back down or be distracted until he achieved it. A goal, driven by the love he feels for those he lost. For love. The creative entity would finally come out of its thoughts, deciding that it had wandered long enough. It was time to go to rest, to hibernate until the time when all life on planet Earth disappeared, when the time to create the universe anew arrived. The biblical-sized being would only walk in the dark emptiness of space, as if he were walking on real, firm ground, even though there was nothing firm in that place. As he made his way to his resting place, he passed through tens of thousands of solar systems and galaxies, seeing and delighting in all the stars along the way, even seeing some spaceships from a couple of intelligent races. But there was something that caught his attention. They were enormous beings, the size of planets, amorphous and horrible beings, like him, only that these beings seemed to be gigantic masses of flesh with different limbs all over their body, whether gigantic tentacles, deformed arms, or even insected legs. Those cosmic abominations only wandered and floated through the cosmic void. Although these beings might seem like gods to inferior races, to God they were nothing more than another race of the bunch, except that these were capable of swallowing entire planets thanks to their bestial size. What caught God's curiosity was the fact that these beings seemed to be attracted by the presence of the cosmic deity, to the point that they began to follow him. At first there were just a few of them, but quickly more and more of these grotesque creatures appeared, until it became a small army of hundreds of these horrible deformed beasts, all following God as if they were his faithful followers. A whole parade of horrible, deformed monsters would wander through the dark, cold space, to the dull, desperate rhythm of vile drums and the faint, monotonous, agonizing moan of demonic flutes, to whose horrendous and blasphemous melody the followers of God dance, following the great creator of all existence like sheep following their shepherd. Naruto didn't know how long he was traveling, being followed by those abominations, but he didn't care. He just kept going until he finally reached the perfect place for his hibernation. The moment he stopped moving, the deformed monsters looked at him with sick curiosity, as if they were eagerly waiting to see what their god would do. The creator would just curl up into a fetal position, hugging his legs while hiding his face between them, remaining completely silent, not moving a single muscle. And it was at that moment that it happened. It was too fast, much faster than a simple blink, so much so that none of the monsters that accompanied the deity could react. Around God, space itself was brutally deformed, while an indescribable gravitational force was present, deforming the very fabric of reality around him. God was covered by a singularity, by a supermassive black hole, whose size was such that it exceeded the size of several galaxies. The massive gravitational force was felt for hundreds of millions of light-years around, to the point where even nearby galaxies began to be affected, slowly traveling towards the origin of said cosmic force. But the ones who were most affected were the monsters themselves, who had followed God as if they were sheep. Those hideous and monstrous abominations were the first to be affected by the massive and indescribable gravitational force. Their enormous and grotesque bodies were stretched in indescribable ways, thanks to the vacuum of space, that no sound could be heard, either that of the bodies of the monstrous beings being brutally torn apart by that powerful gravitational force, nor the euphoric cries of joy they gave before perishing. For those creatures, dying at the hands of God was the greatest pleasure and honor they could feel in their twisted existences. For them, dying by the hand of God was a sign of their love, since thanks to that gesture, they were becoming one with the Creator, they were becoming one with God. In less than 1,000th of a second, all the monsters had perished, leaving absolute silence to reign once again in that section of the cosmos, where God now resided, sleeping peacefully in his great cosmic bed, while he waited for the right moment to wake up and continue with his plan. Hoping, desperately hoping, that next time I'll make it. That they'll come back. Things had been very strange lately in the family of the young Uchiha heir. The abrupt change in personality that the youngest son suffered was something that ended up attracting the attention of everyone who knew him, because Sasuke's serious and somewhat blunt attitude was well known. So it was a huge surprise to see how that young man now seemed to be sunk in a deep depression. However, those who noticed this change the most were the black-haired man's own family, who couldn't be more confused and worried about such an abrupt change in the personality of the youngest member of the family. His older brother tried to approach him on several occasions, trying to talk to him, ask him what was wrong and if he could do something to help him. But none of his attempts worked. Every time he asked Sasuke, he simply ignored him or evaded the question, while his eyes showed a great fear, which Sasuke was not even able to hide properly. Because of this, Itachi instantly realized that something was very wrong with his brother, something that was affecting him too much, and it hurt him to see his younger brother in that state. He felt helpless, he felt useless for not being able to help one of the most important people in his life. That was until an idea came to his mind, like a flash of lightning illuminating the darkness of the night. He may not be able to help his brother, but he knew two people who definitely could, his parents. That conversation was simple, quick and direct. Itachi went straight to his parents, and told them that they should talk to Sasuke, that they were the closest people to him, so it was more likely that he would open up to them and confess what was happening, and why he was in such a depressed state. The Uchiha couple did not hesitate for a second to accept this, both adults being equally worried about the state their youngest son had been in the last few days. However, what happened at that moment was something no one expected. "I will talk to him." The one who had spoken was none other than Fugaku Uchiha himself, Sasuke's own father, the one who compared him a lot to Itachi, who used to be cold and severe with his youngest son, was now saying that he would be the one to talk to Sasuke to find out what was happening to him. The clan leader's words were not what surprised Itachi and Mikoto. What surprised them both was the gleam of concern in the adult's eyes, a gleam of genuine concern from a father for the well-being of one of his children, something that even left Itachi speechless, since seeing that side of his father was something extremely rare. Mikoto and Itachi glanced at each other at this, their expressions showing some doubts towards the family patriarch's decision, but even with those doubts in both of them, they decided to let him talk to Sasuke. Anyway, it wasn't as if they could stop him, although they only prayed that the older black-haired man didn't do anything that would end up making Sasuke's condition worse. Sasuke Uchiha walked aimlessly through the streets of the village, his gaze lost on the horizon, barely paying attention to his path or to the people who looked at him out of the corner of their eyes, curious about his condition, but he didn't even care in the slightest. His eyes were empty and devoid of any will to live, devoid of any hope, a hope that the creator of everything himself took it upon himself to destroy without any mercy, destroying every last spark of light in those onyx eyes until he was dragged into the same dark and cold pit of despair in which that being was. Slowly the sky was tinged with a beautiful orange color, as the sun was setting in the sky, giving way to the cold night. Slowly the stars began to become visible in the night sky, along with the large and beautiful moon, which illuminated everything with its light, like a lighthouse illuminates the darkness. Still, Sasuke didn't stop. He didn't worry about anything, not even what his parents would say to him for being outside without telling anyone. He had done it before, and he didn't care. Nothing mattered to him. The cold night air hit her features as her hair swayed gently at his touch, her steps slow, almost dragging her feet on the ground. She had no fixed direction or place to go. She was just walking through the village without caring about anything else, as if she were a lost soul wandering in search of something that could give her the rest she longed for. But in her case, there was nothing that could give her such rest or peace. She raised her gaze, her onyx eyes fixed on the night sky, seeing those hundreds of stars shining in the sky, and seeing them, she could only feel fear. Fear because she knew he was there, waiting for time to consume them all, to repeat that infinite cycle of destruction and creation, which seemed like it would never end. Sasuke stifled a pitiful sob, knowing that there was nothing he could do, that every effort to stop God would be in vain. The only thing left to do was to wait for his imminent end. Now, Every time I heard or saw someone praying, I could only feel a deep sense of pity for those people, totally ignorant of the horrible truth, a truth in which God does not love them, does not listen to them, and never will, because for the great Creator, they are nothing more than another number in His long list of failed attempts. A number that will be forgotten, and He will decide to erase everything. They weren't special. They weren't unique. And He wasn't either. When the black-haired man was finally able to get out of his thoughts, he realized that he was at the top of the Hokage mountain. He didn't care when or how he got there, it wasn't relevant. He simply sat on the rocky ground, looking down at the village from that height, having a perfect view of the whole place. And it was at that moment, as he watched the lights illuminating the village, that a question escaped from his lips. Who am I? A question that was like a brief and imperceptible whisper that was lost in the air like dust, while he questioned his own existence. Was he really Sasuke Uchiha? No, he wasn't. He was nothing more than a copy of the original, one more failed attempt in the long list of the creators. A flaw that he missed gave him the name and identity of that friend and rival that God lost a long time ago, but the truth was that he wasn't that young Uchiha. I am nobody. That was a complete truth, a horrible fact that tormented the young man's mind. The fact that he was nobody, he was just a failed attempt, one that would soon be erased by the hand of God. He would not be remembered. His worthless life was just another number in the pile. He didn't know how long he stood there, watching the village illuminated by the light of the moon and the stars. But he felt a presence approaching behind him, one he recognized perfectly, which managed to bring him out of his confusion. Sasuke watched as his father sat down beside him, staring in complete silence at the village in front of them both. The black-haired boy was a little surprised to see his father there. He thought his mother or brother would come looking for him, so seeing his father cold and strict was something that caught him off guard. Father, the younger black-haired boy murmured in a melancholic voice, looking sadly at that variant of Fugaku Uchiha. What are you doing here? I was looking for you. And it seems that you were also looking for something, the Uchiha patriarch would say seriously, while his serious and firm gaze remained fixed on the village, but still listening to every word his youngest son said, analyzing each one of them. Honestly, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I don't even know what I am. Sasuke's words were barely audible, being little more than a soft whisper full of regret and sadness, and yet they were heard perfectly by Fugaku, thanks to the silence of the night. Who are you? Many ask themselves that question at least once in their lives, but few are those who dare to look for it. Most do nothing, believing that God will come down from heaven to give them the answer to everything just by praying. Fugaku would say in a serious and harsh manner, while his eyes contained the experience of a man who had seen a lot in his life. The mere mention of the Creator sends a chill through Sasuke's body, but he still listens attentively to every word his father says. But in the end, it is your actions that define who you are. Actions are what make you a man. Yes, but my actions don't matter. In the end, nothing I do will matter. The Uchiha would say pessimistically, remembering the millions of times his previous variants tried to confront God, only to end up failing again and again. From his point of view, his actions were worthless. And who decides that? Many will say that your actions were in vain or that they will not change anything. But those same actions have the potential to change the lives of many, including yours. You just have to have the courage to carry them out and make them a reality. But I tried before. I tried and failed, and many paid the price for it. They needed someone who was able to guide them, to help them, to give them hope. The younger Uchiha would express with regret, remembering with guilt the countless number of lives that were lost in his previous attempts to defeat God, people who followed him, either out of loyalty or fear, but in the end they all ended up perishing, and all because of him. Then become that someone who is able to guide them, Fugaku said, causing his son's eyes to widen suddenly. What? No, that's impossible. You don't understand, Dad. This is something I simply can't do. I can't win. Sasuke clenched his fists with great force, feeling his own nails digging into his skin, to the point where he had started to bleed. The helplessness and desperation he felt prevented him from believing that there could be even a small hope of defeating God and escaping from that infinite loop. But it's not just about you, right? The Uchiha patriarch asked, making his son raise his head in confusion, looking directly at him, while he continued to look at the village. From what you told me, this also affects many more people. It's not just about you, it's about them. But I can't try again, Sasuke said, denying it again, but this time his own words wavered, as if he was doubting that fact, having heard his father's words. There is no choice, son. For the first time since the conversation began, Fugaku turned around, looking Sasuke straight in the eyes, letting him see his father's serious but comforting expression, an expression that strangely managed to give some peace to the boy's tormented mind. No man can escape from his own history. Those words would resonate like an echo inside the mind of the young black-haired boy, who only kept his eyes open, still surprised by what his father had said, not believing that he was capable of saying something so profound. It's beautiful. Don't you think? Fugaku's words made the boy look up again, seeing what his father saw, and that was the village, where some people could still be seen walking through the streets. But it wasn't the village that both Uchihas were seeing, what they really saw. It was possibilities, an entire world full of infinite possibilities, where anyone could choose what to be in life, whether choosing to be the strongest shinobi of all, or a simple civilian who enjoyed life with his friends and family, and that. It was beautiful. That revelation hit Sasuke hard, his eyes wide as the glow returned to them. Yes. It is. The black-haired man responded, while a small smile appeared on his lips, his onyx eyes shining with a new light that none of his variants had, because they were not able to see the same thing as him. Thanks to his father's words, he could see it now. In any situation, no matter how cruel, we can always choose, we can choose to improve. We are what we choose to be, and we can always choose to do what is right. Those supposed flaws had that ability, the ability to choose, to improve, to be much more than what the Creator wanted, but he was not able to see it, and in his blind vision of perfection, he was taking away their free will, he was taking away their right to choose. And that was why he couldn't and wouldn't give up. His previous variants fought out of hatred, revenge, or desperation. But he wouldn't do that, he wouldn't make the same mistake that millions of previous Sasukes made again. He would fight for them, so that they could all choose what to become, to be more than what God created them for. She would fight to break that loop of creation and destruction, and give everyone back their ability to choose, to give them what her father had given her back. Hope. Because that was his story. Thank you, Dad, Sasuke said with a grateful smile, turning to look at his father, who looked at him and also smiled at seeing an improvement in his son's condition. The young black-haired boy approached and gave his father a big hug, which he reciprocated, looking at his son with affection and pride. It was at that moment, on that same night and with the moon as a spectator, where that variant of Sasuke Uchiha had made a decision that would completely change the destiny of his universe. The young Uchiha would decide to go against God's commands, not only for himself, but for all the other beings that inhabited the cosmos. He would use his free will to be much more than what the Creator would expect. It would be much more than just a variant. It would be the one that would return freedom to everyone in that universe. Even in that hug with his father, the young black-haired boy's now hopeful eyes fixed on the night sky filled with bright stars, knowing that he was out there. That sight that had previously terrified him now only reminded him of why he had to fight, further fueling the flame of determination within him. Get ready, Naruto. Because I'm going to defeat you, was Sasuke's thought, as he declared war on the creator of everything, the one who had once been the friend and rival of the first Sasuke. The war against God had begun. Chapter 9, A New Hope. Life. It is a beautiful thing, something so simply wonderful that no words known to man could even begin to accurately describe a small part of it. Not everyone can see it. Many of those who have suffered refuse to see the beauty of life, hiding in a vortex of misfortune and misfortune they have suffered, arguing that life was nothing but misfortune and pain, some going so far as to commit suicide, a quick escape route to rid themselves of the pain of life they felt. But that wasn't the case at all. Life was the most beautiful miracle that could exist, the greatest gift that existence could give to anyone. Life was full of experiences of all kinds, good, wonderful and beautiful experiences, as well as horrible events, tragedies, and disasters that were capable of discouraging the bravest of men. But these experiences are tests that are imposed on every living being, tests that, if overcome, result in a better version of each individual. Each experience helps one to improve, learn from one's mistakes, and in this way, continue improving with each new experience. That was the most beautiful thing about life, what made it so unique and wonderful, the ability to choose, the ability to improve. Everyone could choose, even in the worst situations, one could always choose to be better, choose to become the best version of oneself. Night fell over the village of Konoha, the beautiful dark sky making itself present while the stars illuminated everything in its path, the great moon shining in all its splendor, like a lighthouse that guided the ships in the darkness. But most importantly, it happens in the house of the leading family of the Uchiha clan. After Fugaku and Sasuke returned from having that talk on Mount Hokage, both Makoto and Itachi could instantly see how the younger man's gaze had completely changed. Where once there was a face filled with sadness, resignation, and desolation, now there was a face that reflected the purest determination, her onyx-colored eyes having a gleam full of hope. That was something that none of the members of his family had seen before in the young man. However, this made them very happy to see how the youngest member of the family's state had changed for the better in such a short time. All the doubts that Makoto and Itachi had at first vanished when they saw how good talking to his father had done for Sasuke. After that, the whole family had a nice and quiet dinner, happy to see Sasuke happy, and once dinner was over, everyone went to their respective rooms to rest. The three oldest members were happy that that bad moment had finally come to an end. However, for Sasuke this wasn't the end at all, it was just the beginning. With that new determination flowing through his being, he was more than willing to face God, defeat him, and end this endless cycle of pain and destruction that surpassed anything else he had ever known. But he knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The difference in power between him and Naruto was basically infinite. He was talking about him, a human, defeating a cosmic anomaly capable of devouring gods. And even with that huge difference, the Uchiha would not give up. His determination and desire for freedom would not falter in the face of that harsh reality. It was at that moment that he put his mind to work as fast as he could. Naruto said he would let humanity disappear on its own. That would take millions of years. It may be little for him, but for us, that's a long time. I have to take advantage of it, the young man would say thoughtfully and analytically, while sitting on the bed in his room. Something Sasuke had in his favor was the experience and knowledge of all their previous variants, millions of strategies that they performed and failed. Even if they failed, he could learn from those mistakes, using those experiences to his advantage to improve. Fighting head-on would be of no use, not even with whole exercises. Negotiations were of no use. I could start training to master special techniques. It's possible that I've already reached Manjikyu by seeing those visions. Sasuke examined that possibility. The tremendous trauma that knowing the truth of the universe generated in him was something that had awakened the Manjikyu in almost all its versions, and it is very likely that it had also happened to him. It would not surprise him if it were so and he had not realized it because he was immersed in his depression. I could learn to use natural chakra, the 8 internal gates, different degrees of medical senjutsu, and if there are other types of energy in this universe, I could manage to learn them. The black-haired man's mind was filled with each and every one of the most powerful and versatile techniques that had been created by the ninja world, techniques that his previous variants had learned in their fight to defeat God. Although he didn't know how to perform most of them, he knew that the option to learn them was there. But that wouldn't be enough. Every existing technique or power was created by Naruto. He must already have all those techniques but much more powerful. Sasuke clicked his tongue at that thought, frustrated. That was the bad thing about facing a being that was the very source, the origin of the universe, that everything in the cosmos had been created by that being, and that it was more than obvious that it surpassed everything in existence. Not to mention that, thanks to previous memories, he knows that Naruto never created the Otsutsuki race again, perhaps out of resentment, or to prevent someone from obtaining their powers and becoming a threat, but he knows that by not having that race, he had lost a resource that would have been very useful to him. If the Uchiha wanted to beat the creator of everything, he had to go further, he had to use something different, something. That is not from this universe. Sasuke's eyes widened as that idea came to his mind, a thought that illuminated everything as if it were the brightest beacon of light in all of history. But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Naruto had full knowledge and power over everything created in the universe, in his universe. So, it was best to look for something that did not belong to his cosmic domains, something that he simply did not know, or at least, over which he did not have absolute control. Thanks to God revealing the truth about the multiverse to him, he knew that there was an infinite amount of world out there, a world that Naruto himself was afraid to interact with. In fact, the only rule, the most sacred commandment imposed by the Creator, was to never do anything related to the multiverse, due to the fear he had of attracting the attention of unknown beings that could harm his plans. Sasuke was also somewhat afraid of that possibility, afraid of the unknown, that by doing so he could end up entering a world 1,000 times worse than his own. And not only that, there was also the fact that he would be leaving his family at the mercy of God. If he suddenly decided to destroy and remake the universe, then everything would be over as soon as he returned. Also the fact that time could flow differently when he returned, even if God didn't destroy everything. Thousands of years could have passed. It was not an easy decision. Having to leave his universe involved taking too many risks. At that moment, Sasuke would look up, his eyes filled with doubt, and he would see a photo hanging on his wall, a framed photo where his family could be seen smiling happily. A family that had disappeared throughout the universes created and destroyed, a family that he loved with all his being. Seeing that photo, he imagined that they would never escape that loop, if he did nothing, if he did not gather enough courage. Infinite variations of that family he loved so much would end up suffering the same fate. And that also applied to infinite families throughout the universe. That thought was enough to clear every trace of doubt and fear from the young Uchiha's mind. Even if it was hard, even if the road was long, even if he had to go through hell itself, he would overcome it all. He would overcome everything to be able to break that loop and give everyone the gift of freedom. Even if for that, he had to say goodbye to his family. After all, tough decisions require strong wills. Time flew by, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months finally turned into years. As quickly as a sigh fades into the wind, the years would pass in the blink of an eye for the young Uchiha. Sasuke would make the most of every second, knowing perfectly well what he had to do. He had to become strong as possible, this to be ready when he goes to another universe to ask for help. Only this time he would not do anything extreme, like going with Orochimaru or betraying the village as millions of his previous variants had done. The young black-haired boy would train to the maximum with his father and brother, who would be more than happy to help him become stronger. The patriarch of the family would help him as much as possible, teaching him all kinds of techniques, different uses for his Sharingan and fighting styles, which was the same with Itachi. During this time, Sasuke also realized that he had awakened his Manjikyu. This didn't really surprise him much. After the trauma of knowing the truth about his universe and the loop they were all in, it was inevitable. In fact, several of his previous variants had obtained their Manjikyu this way. He had to tell his family that he had managed to unlock his Manjikyu, who were obviously shocked and worried by this, knowing full well the unpleasant method that was required. When his wall and brother had asked him, Sasuke had told them that he preferred not to talk about it. Luckily, his family understood, knowing that the method to obtain the Manjikyu was not pleasing to anyone in the Uchiha clan, so they let him pass when he told them that he had not killed anyone to obtain it. After that, Fugaku and Itachi helped him train his Manjikyu and how to master it, warning him not to use it too much so as not to go blind, something that Sasuke already knew thanks to the memories of his previous variants. But that was not something his family needed to know. The black-haired boy had taken it upon himself to cover every possible situation, learning not only shinobi weaponry, the use of his Sharingan and Manjikyu, but he had even learned some medical ninjutsu, in case of emergencies. It wasn't nearly as good as Tsunade's or Sakura's, but it would serve him well. However, Sasuke knew that things were about to get much more complicated. The hardest part wasn't getting strong, no. The most complicated and tedious part was the changes in history that were going to occur. In itself, the universe created by God was nothing like the original. The Uchiha massacre did not happen, Itachi was not a traitor, the personalities of some were totally different, among along etc. As if that wasn't enough, the moment Naruto left the planet, he had erased all traces of his presence from the minds of everyone in the world. Because of this, a great number of changes occurred in future events. To begin with, the formation of the teams was completely different, ending up in Team 5, with Hinata Hyuga and the boy Sai, although luckily he continued to have Kakashi as his teacher. Together they took the test of the bells, which they managed to pass and completed several missions, including the one on the bridge in the Land of Waves, where they faced Zabuza and Haku and barely managed to get out alive. The rest of the events would happen, although they would change radically. The most important would be the invasion of the Sand Village and the Sound Village. The most notable and the most noticeable change would be that Gaara did not redeem himself, as happened in so many other worlds, continuing to be someone cruel and sadistic. Because of this, the village of Konoha was on bad terms with the Sand, because of the invasion. After that, more and more events followed, although Sasuke was not present at most of them. He learned that Tsunade returned to the village thanks to Jiraiya. He doesn't know how he managed to convince her, but it didn't matter in the end. The years flew by again, and the Uchiha never stopped training, knowing that he had to be ready for the decisive moment, the moment where he would have to give his all to obtain the key to the multiverse, that which was the key to his plan. And after so much time of preparation and hard training, the day had arrived, the day that would decide the fate of his universe. Sasuke knew perfectly well that if he failed at this point, the consequences that would hit the entire universe would be indescribable, as well as the universes that God would create after finishing this one. He did not know if the following variants of himself would follow the same path. He did not know if any other Sasuke would continue on the path of hope or would immerse himself in hatred and revenge like his millions of predecessors did, so he knew that he had to achieve it no matter what. The mere fact that the Creator had not intervened in their plans was a sign that he was not aware of them, that he was indeed sleeping out there, in the depths of space. The young Uchiha sighs slowly, calming his breathing as he feels his own pulse racing, hearing the beating of his own heart in his ears as he feels like said organ seems to be about to burst out of his chest. He had prepared for this moment for years. This moment would be the one that would start his plan, his great rebellion against the Creator of the cosmos. If he failed here, then everything would be over before it began. He was more than aware that such a plan would not be easy, but if this turned out well, then a new hope would be born against the monster that Naruto Uzumaki once was. Just thinking about that name sent horrible shivers down his spine, like a sharp scythe blade running through his body, as if the Grim Reaper himself was furious with him and wanted to rip out his soul for even mentioning that forbidden name. Several memories flashed through his mind at that moment, fleeting flashes of his ancestors' experiences, events and experiences that he never lived, but that he is able to remember vividly, as if he had truly lived them. These were the failures of the millions of previous Sasukes, of an immense hatred that in the end only increased the pool of despair in which they themselves sank. But he knew perfectly well that despair, hatred and resentment would be of no use to him. They would not make him move forward. Those feelings would only repeat the same mistake of his predecessors and end up with the same ending. He had to be more, he had to evolve, he had to and wanted to see them happy, see them enjoy and take pleasure in the wonderful gift that was life. They were not puppets, they were not replaceable, they were alive, and that was something that their Creator did not want to accept. Sasuke was forced out of his thoughts when the sound of a loud and powerful explosion reached his ears. He was at the top of the Hokage mountain, seeing the entire village from that place, the place where so many years ago he had that conversation with his father, which was the one that started that path of hope. The black-haired man's onyx eyes managed to see several columns of smoke rising throughout the village. He knew exactly what it was about. It was an event that had occurred in the vast majority of previous universes. Pain, the leader of Akatsuki, was attacking the village. Thanks to God altering everyone's minds after his departure, everyone in the village knew they had a Jinchuriki, but no one knew who it was, and thanks to the Creator's influence, no one was interested in knowing who it was. That was a failure that occurred after God altered everyone's minds. The Rinnegan wielder was searching for said Jinchuriki in order to complete his plan to bring peace to the shinobi world through fear and pain. Sasuke couldn't help but let out a sigh at that. shaking his head in disappointment at the orange-haired man's ideology. While many of his previous variants would have agreed with Pain's mentality, he wasn't like those Sasukes. He realized the huge mistake it was to follow that ideology of hate and pain. Because in the end, pain would generate more resentment, resentment would turn into hatred, and hatred into revenge. Pain's ideology would not change the world, because sooner or later someone would rise up with the flames of hatred against him. The young Uchiha pushed those thoughts out of his head. That wasn't what was important at that moment. The important thing was to get the key. Thanks to his Sharingan, he was able to perfectly see his target, who was fighting against his sensei Kakashi in a fight to the death. That figure wearing an orange spiral-shaped mask that showed its only eye, an eye that at that moment was the greatest treasure of all and the key to hope. Sasuke didn't say a single word. He knew perfectly well what he had to do. He just disappeared in a blur of speed, leaving a small crater in the place, his mind and being filled with an unbreakable determination. In one part of the village, two individuals could be seen fighting wildly, violently clashing against each other as they tried to take advantage of any opportunity to extinguish the life of their enemy. Kakashi Hatake would throw a side kick to his masked enemy's head, but his attack would only pass through him as if he were a ghost, something that frustrated him. The masked man would take advantage of the proximity and grab his leg with great force and then spin on his own axis, slamming the silver-haired man against the ground, creating a small crater in the process. Obito would launch a large fireball at Kakashi. It seemed that the attack had managed to hit its target, but when the dust cleared, a log would be revealed, which was half charred by the attack. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, the masked Uchiha had no time to dodge a hammer blow from his enemy, which slightly disoriented him, which was taken advantage of by Hatake to deliver a powerful kick to the pit of his stomach, forcing the masked man to retreat a few meters, regaining his breath. Both ninjas would recompose themselves, their gazes connecting as their respective Sharingan glowed with a menacing red light. Kakashi was confused. He had no idea who that guy was or why that Akatsuki member had gone to attack him directly, but even so, he felt something very familiar about him, something that gave him a bad feeling. For his part, Obito didn't say anything either. He had decided to take advantage of Pain's attack on the village to recover the eye he had given to his old friend so many years ago. He couldn't leave any loose ends. It was too dangerous for Kakashi to have access to his Kamui. If he discovered the full potential of that technique, he could become a great threat, so the best thing was to eliminate him while he was still weak. "I will take back what belongs to me," was all Obito said, his voice cold and dark, sending a slight chill through his enemy's body. Both ninjas would begin to take small steps, slowly approaching each other, with their guard up against any attack the other might launch. "I don't even know who you are," the shinobi of the leaf answered seriously. Obito was about to launch himself against his former friend. But he saw out of the corner of his eye how a large fire attack was heading towards him, forcing him to use his Kamui to absorb it. As he performed this action, he felt himself being hit from behind, seeing how the person responsible for this was Sasuke Uchiha himself, who was sending him a look full of determination. The Akatsuki's body was sent flying, passing through several pieces of rubble due to the great force of that chakra-charged and enhanced blow. Kakashi was surprised by the arrival of his student, not expecting him to appear. "Sasuke, what?" The silver-haired man didn't have time to finish speaking when his student appeared next to him, revealing that the combo of attacks the masked man received was made by shadow clones. While the Uchiha did not have enough chakra to make as many as Naruto, he still had enough to make a couple of said clones, which were essential to his plan against the Akatsuki member. "There is no time, Kakashi. This is not a battle you can win alone," the Uchiha would say with total seriousness, glancing at his sensei. "I know that guy's ability. He can send everything he absorbs to a pocket dimension, including parts of his body, leaving a residual image in its place. This creates the illusion of being intangible." Kakashi opened his eyes in surprise at the detailed explanation given by his student, not expecting him to know his mysterious enemy's ability so well. "Sasuke, how do you have that information?" the silver-haired shinobi asked in surprise. "It's a long story. I'll just say that I was secretly investigating that guy," the young black-haired man quickly responded, hiding the truth from his sensei. "Look, We have to distract him, make him use his ability as much as possible, attack him while he's trying to absorb an attack, plus he's vulnerable to explosive seals. Make him absorb them without realizing it. Hitachi was visibly surprised by Sasuke's strategy. It seemed as if he had already faced the masked man before. He had many questions for his student, but he knew perfectly well that it was not the right time. He would simply nod his head, just in time to see his student turn around, blocking a blow launched by the masked man, who had appeared behind them in a kind of vortex. Sasuke would quickly give Obito a strong kick, but the latter would use his Kamui to avoid said attack, ending up giving a strong blow to the younger Uchiha's chin, at the same time as he dodged an attack from Kakashi, who sought to stab him with a kunai surrounded by electricity. Pathetic, the masked man would say coldly, while quickly performing hand seals, jumping in the air and launching a large amount of fireballs, which would fall against his enemies like a kind of fiery rain. Both Konoha shinobi would move at high speeds, dodging the masked Uchiha's attack. Student and teacher would move so fast that they would look like two blurs to any normal person who saw them. Sasuke would take out the sword given to him by his father, which he would cover with right-on element, making it even more deadly. In a quick movement, he would appear in front of Obito, launching a diagonal cut at him, which would not affect the Akatsuki Uchiha. "That won't do you any good," he would say, while throwing a punch at his opponent's face, who quickly ducked, not only evading the blow, but also leaving the way clear for Kakashi to catch the masked man off guard, giving him a strong blow to the stomach. Obito would be forced to retreat, while he watched as teacher and student each formed a Chidori, running at full speed against him. Kakashi would launch himself at high speed against the Akatsuki, starting to throw several blows at him with his Chidori, attacks that the masked man managed to read easily thanks to his Sharingan, quickly blocking and dodging each of Hitachi's attempts to hit him. In turn, he would respond with a sweep to his former friend's legs, managing to unbalance him. He was going to take advantage, but he had to react and dodge Sasuke's Chidori, which positioned itself on the black-haired man's back. Sasuke's attack would end up going through Obito, but this was thanks to Kamui, not affecting him at all. The masked Akatsuki would turn around and throw a strong kick to the boy's face, who would manage to use his forearms in an X shape to block the attack. Obito would withdraw his leg and would be about to carry out another attack, but he would open his eyes when he saw how his leg with which he attacked Sasuke was full of explosive papers. Due to the surprise, he couldn't dodge a double blow from both shinobi, a punch from Kakashi that connected to his back, along with a kick from Sasuke to the pit of his stomach. Right after, both of them moved away from the black-haired masked man, watching as the papers exploded, covering the Akatsuki in the explosion. From the dust, Obito could be seen emerging with some wounds, his leg showing a rather large burn, which would bother him a lot. However, Sasuke wouldn't even give him time to breathe. The shinobi would have moved on to the next level, activating his Manjikyu and summoning an arm of his Susanoo and taking advantage of the masked man's slight moment of carelessness, managing to deliver a quick and fierce blow, which Obito did not have time to use his Kamui for. The masked man's body was sent flying by said blow, while he spat out a little blood, feeling like at least a couple of his ribs had been broken by that blow. Even while in full flight, Obito would try to use his Kamui to teleport, but at that moment Kakashi would appear along with a pair of Sasuke clones, which would launch a large number of explosive seals, which would explode the instant the Kamui would try to absorb them, triggering a large chain explosion, which would end up damaging and stunning the Akatsuki member. Sasuke wouldn't give Obito any time to rest. As soon as he saw the figure of the Akatsuki in the dust, Obito launched another devastating blow with his Susanoo arm. Without any mercy, he summoned his other arm, beginning to launch blow after blow against the masked man, who couldn't react to the strong attacks he received. His mask began to crack, while jets of blood came out of his mouth and part of his head. He tried to use his Kamui to teleport, but saw how Kakashi appeared in front of him, launching a large number of explosive seals, which detonated as soon as they came into contact with his Manjikyu technique. A simple, but effective technique. Sasuke relentlessly attacked Obito with his most powerful technique, while Kakashi threw dozens of explosive seals at him, which exploded as soon as he tried to use his Kamui. Thanks to this, they had managed to corner the masked Akatsuki. Blood gushed out of the black-haired man's mouth, feeling how blow after blow of that technique was impacted against his body. Even when he tried to use chakra to reinforce himself, the damage he suffered was too much. He felt his bones breaking, his organs began to bleed, and he didn't even have time to move a finger. For some reason, these guys knew the weakness of his technique, and had used that to corner him. No. It can't end like this, Obito thought with growing fear, feeling his ribs shatter from another powerful blow from Sasuke's Susanoo. So many years, so much planning, to end up in a fight that didn't even last 5 minutes. Obito tried to activate his 𝙬𝙬𝕦𝕐𝕗 again, but the explosive seals detonated as soon as they touched the technique, causing it to be interrupted and the subject to suffer damage from the explosion, just after receiving another powerful blow from the Susanoo, which sent him directly to the ground. This is over, Sasuke would say with total seriousness. This would increase the power of his Susanoo, creating the entire upper part of the skeleton, which would be surrounded by armor. The spiritual figure would create a bow and prepare a large arrow. Without hesitating for a second, the Uchiha fired the arrow at his enemy. Obito's eyes widened in fear as he saw the attack heading his way. He tried to use his 𝙬𝕬𝕦𝕐𝕗 to dodge it, but once again dozens of explosive seals were absorbed by his technique, detonating and seriously injuring the Uchiha. Damn nuisance, the masked man would have shouted in fury towards the Hatake, completely furious and frustrated at seeing how they had him cornered. However, during that brief moment of distraction, Susanoo's arrow managed to hit him squarely. The sound of flesh being torn and bones breaking filled the ears of all three present, while a large shockwave occurred in the area, sending Kakashi flying into some rubble. That great spiritual arrow had pierced the right half of the masked man's head, destroying that part of his brain in less than a blink of an eye. Remains of the Uchiha's bodies and brain matter flew through the air, blood pouring out like a fountain as the life disappeared from the Akatsuki's now only eye, his body remaining frozen in place for a few seconds. That was a completely instant death, a death so fast that Obito couldn't even perform the Izanagi to avoid his death. That was an instant death, a death that would leave no room for his target to escape or save themselves in any way. Even so, Sasuke would appear in front of Obito's now corpse, and without hesitation, he would throw a 𝙬𝕬𝕦𝕐𝕗 on him. The black flames would quickly cover the entire body of the now deceased Akatsuki, reducing to ashes what was once one of the most dangerous criminals in the ninja world. Before Obito's entire body was consumed by the black flames, Sasuke drove his arm into Obito's face, bringing out what he had longed for all these years to achieve his plan, Obito Uchiha's Manjikyu Sharingan. He kept that eye in a special seal, before seeing how the black fire of Amaterasu completely consumed and disintegrated the body, leaving not even ashes of what was once Obito Uchiha. This wasn't a long or epic battle, there were no dialogues that showed the determination of the individuals or a fight of ideals. It was a short fight, where Sasuke didn't even bother to talk to Obito, he just limited himself to attacking him with everything he had and with every intention of killing him. And that's what he did, he took advantage of every known weakness of the 𝙬𝕬𝕦𝕐𝕗. He overwhelmed Obito with as many attacks as he could, not letting him even react to use his ocular technique, and when he used it, he made sure to saturate him with explosive seals to incapacitate him. He even made sure to give him an instant death so that he couldn't even use the Izanagi to revive. Sasuke used the memories and experiences of his variant ancestors to cover every possible outcome of a confrontation with Obito, every weakness, every probability. It was something he had been planning for years, for if he failed here, his entire universe would be doomed. But now, with that eye, there was hope. Sasuke couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. With Obito's death, all the events that would lead to the Fourth Shinobi War were avoided, so he had saved himself a lot of trouble. But at that, another very important matter came to his mind. Kakashi. The black-haired man muttered with some regret, before speeding off to find his master. This managed to easily find Hatake, who was unconscious on some rubble, a product of the shock wave caused by his last attack. He looked at him sadly, knowing well what he had to do. "I'm really sorry," the black-haired man murmured, while taking a kunai out of his pocket. It was fast, he couldn't allow the silver-haired boy to wake up, one quick movement and Sasuke already had Obito's other eye. He knew that I was an object of great value to his master, a symbol that he had to protect others, so losing it would be something that would hit him very hard. But Sasuke knew that if he wanted his plan to work, it was best to have both eyes so that it would have a better chance of success. He gave the silver-haired boy one last apologetic look before picking him up and retreating to safety. Along the way, he saw how Tsunade, Itachi, ℕ𝕒𝕗, his father and several members of the Uchiha and Hyuga clans were facing off against Pain. He didn't bother to go. He could clearly see how they were overwhelming the orange-haired man, so the result of the fight was more than obvious, even more so when he saw the Susanoo of his father, brother and ℕ𝕒𝕗 dealing a joint blow to the Rinnegan bearer, who was already very injured. I had seen this result thousands of times before. It had been a week since Akatsuki's attack on Konoha village. The results were not very good. The village had been destroyed by the Rinnegan bearer. Many had died, both ninja and civilians. Those who survived had lost their homes and jobs. The battle against Pain was not easy at all. They managed to defeat him and his 6 paths of Pain, along with their ally Konan, but more than half of the forces of the Uchiha and Hyuga clan had died. After defeating the original Pain, they managed to detect the original body of Nagato Uzumaki, which was personally executed by Fugaku, but not before snatching his Rinnegan, which could be very useful to them in the future, especially now that they lost many of their military forces. Tsunade had been seriously injured, but she still spent days helping the wounded, receiving help from all the medical staff who had managed to survive the orange-haired boy's massive Shinra Tensei. Meanwhile, Fugaku, Itachi, ℕ𝕒𝕗 and Sasuke helped rebuild the village. Thanks to the Susanoo they were very useful. When Kakashi realized that he had lost the Sharingan that Obito gave him, he became quite upset. When he asked what had happened, the doctors told him that he had lost his eye due to a surprise attack by the masked man. The doctors had said this because they were under a genjutsu from Sasuke. The black-haired man felt bad seeing his master so depressed by that loss, but he knew that if he wanted his plan to work, he needed both eyes. Now, there was just one more thing missing. A little over a month had passed since the incident with Akatsuki, and the village was already 70% rebuilt, and Sasuke was ready for what would be the most difficult part of his plan: having to say goodbye to his family. The night before they had had what would be their last dinner together. A break after spending all day helping with the reconstruction of the village, a beautiful moment with the family. Sasuke made sure to enjoy every second to the fullest, making sure that feeling of family warmth, along with the faces of his parents and brother, remained etched in his mind. A beautiful family moment. And the next morning, the Uchiha family was at the entrance of the village, because Sasuke had called them to inform them of that important news. "What do you mean you're leaving?" Mikoto exclaimed in total shock and surprise, and how could she not be? Her youngest son had just told her that he was leaving the village. Just when the village was recovering from Pain's attack, she was confused and surprised. Sasuke just looked sadly at his family, knowing that this would be the hardest thing he would ever have to do in his entire life. But even so, he gathered all the strength he needed, knowing that if he didn't do this, nothing would change. "Really, I'm very sorry. But there's something I have to do, a mission that I imposed on myself," the younger black-haired boy would say with seriousness and firmness in his voice, although the sadness of having to separate from his family was noticeable from a mile away. "It's something I have to do alone. I've been thinking and planning it for years. Now that Akatsuki is gone, the time has come." The boy looked at his family, feeling his eyes water for a second, but he suppressed that sadness. "It's possible that we won't see each other again." Those words were a bomb that left the black-haired man's family in total shock, who looked surprised and confused at the youngest, the question of what the hell was it that he had to do running through their minds. Sasuke instantly realized the question that was on the minds of the three, cursing for not being able to tell them, not only because they wouldn't believe him, but also because news like that could destroy his will to live. "This journey, it's long. Too long. I have to go far away. I can't tell you where I'll go, but this is something I have to do. And Sasuke's voice was slowly breaking. Even though he wanted to remain calm and collected, it was impossible. The fact of having to move away from his family was something that simply hurt him, It hurt too much, more than any blow or wound he had ever received in his entire life. But then, he opened his eyes in amazement, feeling himself being hugged, seeing how his family, the people he loved the most, hugged him with all the affection and love that a family could transmit. Sasuke couldn't resist it any longer. He reciprocated the hug with all his strength, while shedding silent tears, just as he saw how his parents and brother also shed light tears. In that gesture, everyone showed the immense love they had for each other, a family that in very few of those millions of attempts could be happy, and that now had to separate. After a few minutes of crying, Sasuke pulled away from the hug. He didn't really want to do that. He wanted to stay with them a little longer, but he knew he would always want a little more time with his family. Please take care of yourself. Okay. Mikoto would say with a sad smile, not being able to help but shed tears. All parents know that sooner or later their children will have to leave the nest and go make their own lives, fulfill their own goals, and although they feel proud to see how that little boy or girl became an adult, it is always sad to see them leave, so the only thing they could do was wish them the best, and that was exactly what Mikoto was doing with her youngest son, wishing him to fulfill his goal and above all, to be happy. Sasuke just nodded at his mother's words, smiling happily at the woman who brought him into the world, before turning to look at his father, who just looked at him with a smile that reflected total pride in the person his son had become. I'm very proud of you, Sasuke, the adult would say with a smile, while placing one of his hands on the miner's shoulder, his eyes reflecting the affection that every father feels when seeing his son become a man capable of taking care of himself. The youngest of the family could only smile at his father's words, shedding a small tear of joy, which he quickly wiped away. He would look at the last member of his family, his older brother, that guy who in thousands of other universes had caused him a lot of pain and left him with lifelong traumas. But not here, in this universe. He was a good brother who supported him in everything and who chose a different path than harming his family and clan. He didn't care what those variants had done, he cared about the person in front of him, the person who had decided to be a good brother. Don't do stupid things, Sasuke Itachi said, looking at his brother with a smile, who couldn't help but let out a small laugh at this. I'll do what I can, he said with some amusement, knowing that he was in fact about to do the craziest thing of all. Itachi would just approach him and give him that classic poke with his 2 fingers on the forehead, the greatest gesture of affection he had towards his brother. Faced with this, Sasuke would only give his older brother a hug which he would end up reciprocating. After a few seconds, the younger black-haired boy separated, taking one last look at his family. Well, I have to go, Sasuke would say sadly, turning around and starting to walk, moving further and further away from his village. From afar, his family just watched him leave, waving as they watched that member of their family, now an adult, leave the nest. Although it was sudden, they knew that this moment would come sooner or later, and even more so in a world like the shinobi world, where children had to mature quickly. Fugaku and Mikoto just watched with huge smiles full of pride as their youngest son left the nest. They knew that their son was capable of taking care of himself. He was a shinobi after all, although a part of them wondered what that mission their son set himself was. They might never know, but something told them that Sasuke would be okay. But what they did know for sure was that they were very proud of the person Sasuke Uchiha had become. It had been a couple of hours since Sasuke left the village. He had been running at full speed, once he got out of sight of his family. This in order to get away from everyone to avoid any kind of inconvenience. He was in the middle of a forest, several kilometers from any type of civilization, town or village. He made sure that no one was following him, and with everything ready, he was prepared to begin the next step of his plan. The black-haired man would take out a jar from a scroll, said jar had Obito's eyes, which floated in a special liquid to prevent the deterioration of said organs. This part will be very unpleasant, the black-haired man muttered under his breath, cursing the fact that, of all possible things, Naruto has not changed the method of obtaining the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. He summoned 2 shadow clones, which took the jar with Obito's eyes, along with a pair of kunais. The next thing that happened was that in that area of that desolate forest, Sasuke's small screams of pain could be heard, along with his gasps and moans caused by his eyes being torn out. It was extremely painful. He could feel the blood dripping from his sockets, while a clone implanted 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕦𝕬𝕬𝕬 eyes as quickly as possible to prevent him from losing too much blood, making sure to do the process well. Once the 2 eyes were implanted, both clones began to bandage their eyes, while applying medical ninjutsu, in order for the wounds to heal as quickly as possible and speed up the process. Seriously, Sasuke hated this method of gaining power. After a couple of hours, the clones would disappear, having finished the operation, having been applying medical ninjutsu at every moment. The Uchiha would slowly stand up, feeling somewhat dizzy. He would slowly remove the bandages covering his eyes, opening them slowly, feeling the sunlight hitting his face. His vision was a little blurry at first, but it quickly returned to normal. He would take out a mirror from a scroll, looking at his reflection and examining his new eyes in detail. Fortunately, the process had been a resounding success. His eyes and 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬 had fused perfectly, giving birth to a new and powerful 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬𝕬 Sharingan that had not existed in any of the previous universes. Sasuke couldn't help but smile happily, his hand touching the edges of his eyes. This was the result of many years of waiting and planning. So many years of thinking about all the possibilities had paid off. Incredible. The black-haired man murmured in wonder, feeling a great power in those eyes. Thanks to the fact that he had exchanged his eyes with 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬𝕬, he not only obtained an eternal Manjikyu, but he obtained all the abilities of said eyes, including the Kamui. Now is the moment of truth. He would say this with complete and absolute seriousness, knowing that this moment was the most important of his entire life, the one that would reveal whether his plan would actually work or be a total failure. He didn't even bother to pray for this to turn out well. After all, the same being that everyone in the universe prays to is the one he wants to defeat. Sasuke began to concentrate massive amounts of chakra into his eyes, causing his newborn eternal Manjikyu to begin spinning rapidly, its speed increasing with each passing second. The black-haired man had his gaze fixed on a fixed point, his mind remembering each and every time he had seen 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬𝕬, both from his universe and from the previous ones, perform those techniques. Only now, he was using the same method that the original 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬 used. He created a portal to reach another world, another space-time. That method that the redeemed original 𝕬𝕐𝕦𝕬𝕬 used during the battle against 𝙬𝙖𝙪𝙨 Otsutsuki to rescue the original Sasuke. Sasuke began to accumulate massive amounts of his chakra in a single point, a small point of space in front of him, with the goal of opening a portal. Using Kamui was much more complicated than I imagined. Each world was like a grain of sand in an immense and infinite desert, but the problem was that each grain of sand was completely far from each other. Not to mention that he had to be careful not to open a portal to heaven or hell, or he might end up accidentally alerting Naruto, and all his effort would be in vain. The black-haired man could feel it, he could visualize it in his mind, a small dot, a grain of sand that was incredibly far from his position. It felt completely different from anything he had ever experienced in life. That was it, that small dot was his goal. Now he just had to make the portal, trace the path to that point. Come on! Damn it, do it! Sasuke growled loudly, while he applied more and more chakra to his eyes, seeking to enhance that space-time technique. Seconds passed and the result was nothing, which frustrated the black-haired man quite a bit, who became slightly nervous. The thought of failing crossed his mind, making fear begin to grow within him. If this plan didn't work, everything would be doomed. There would just be one more number in the infinite loop of destruction and creation. Sasuke growled as he stopped trying, his first attempt, and he had failed. But he wasn't willing to give up, his universe wouldn't be destroyed. He was willing to give absolutely everything so that all the beings in the cosmos could have their free will back, so that they could be themselves without that insane cosmic being destroying them just for being who they are. No. This time it will be different, he told himself, while he wiped the sweat from his forehead and tried again. His eternal Manjikyu spun again, his gaze fixed on a fixed point in space in front of him. He was betting everything on this play, concentrating every last drop of his chakra and effort in his eyes. The effort he was putting in was obvious. Drops of sweat were falling non-stop down his face, veins were beginning to appear around his eyes, while small drops of blood fell from his nose and tears of said deep red liquid fell from his eyes. An immense headache was beginning to appear due to the overexertion, along with the exhaustion of using so much chakra at once. And yet, there was nothing. Come on, do it. Damn it, you didn't come this far to fail. It's not because of you, it's because of them. Sasuke screamed in frustration, as more and more blood began to come out of his eyes and nose, his eternal manjikyu spinning like a helicopter's propeller, as more and more chakra was used in that technique, in that hope. This is for them. And it happened. Sasuke watched in total amazement as a portal opened up about a meter in front of him. It was small, just big enough for a person to enter, but it didn't look stable at all. It seemed like it was constantly trying to close, struggling to stay open. On the other side, he could see the village of Konoha, but not the half-destroyed and recovering village he had been in just a few hours ago, but a completely intact Konoha, as if it had never been the victim of Pain's attack. A huge smile appeared on the Uchiha's lips, as tears of pure happiness and relief flowed non-stop from his eyes. I did it. I really did it, he murmured, feeling a wave of happiness and hope run through every corner of his body, knowing that all those years of planning, training and effort had been worth it. He instantly noticed how the portal was shrinking, so he didn't hesitate for a single second to concentrate the little chakra he had left in his legs and launch himself at full speed towards that portal. His body shot out like a bullet, managing to pass through that small portal by the skin of his teeth, a portal that ended up closing just as Sasuke entered. The portal disappeared completely, leaving that forest in absolute silence, a forest where the greatest of miracles had happened, the miracle of hope. Sasuke felt his entire body shake in every direction, as if his body was being pulled, stretched, shrunk and shaken all at the same time. It was like being in the middle of a tornado, only it didn't hurt him. It was a strange sensation. Everything around him was spinning, colors blending into shades of gray and blue, directions becoming meaningless. Until at one point, the Uchiha saw a small point of light in the distance, a point of light that he began to approach quickly. A powerful and blinding light completely overwhelmed his entire gaze, forcing him to close his tired and sore eyes, letting that intense and powerful glow consume his entire being. What Sasuke felt was his body hitting the hard ground, or at least he thought it felt like the ground. He felt extremely tired from using all his chakra in that portal. His vision was blurry and all he could hear was a high-pitched noise that filled his ears. Before he fell into unconsciousness, he could see a silhouette approaching him. He could only pray that it was someone kind. Finally, Sasuke fainted due to exhaustion, but was happy that he achieved his goal. His plan had been a success. I do it. I really do it.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown in left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.